When love looks like always putting you first. They tell you it's because they love you, that you matter more than anything, that their whole world revolves around you. They cancel plans for you. They drop everything the moment you need something. They say yes even when they're tired. They show up over and over again no matter the cost to themselves. And in the beginning it feels like devotion, like commitment, like the kind of love everyone wants but few ever find. You feel chosen, cared for, safe, because how could it be anything but love when someone is constantly putting you first, when someone is always there, when someone makes you feel like the center of their universe? But then something shifts, slowly, quietly. At first you notice how uncomfortable they get when you take time for yourself, how they withdraw a little when you choose someone else's company for the night, how their voice tightens when you don't immediately reply, how they start keeping track of favors, of time, of how often you've put them first in return. And the praise they once gave so freely begins to come with a shadow. I always make time for you. Don't you see that? I would never have missed that dinner for anything. I guess I just care more than you do. Suddenly the love feels heavier, tighter. It no longer flows. It leans hard. It leans on your time, your attention, your ability to give back. And if you fall short even once, it shows. The silence, the sighs, the guilt-laced compliments that sound more like obligations. You realize that what looked like unconditional love was actually a trade, a contract, a bargain you didn't know you were making, that all the self-sacrifice was actually a form of control, and now you're trapped. Because saying something would make you seem ungrateful, pulling back would make you the villain. So you give, you adjust. You start measuring your love in returned favors, in scheduled time, in emotional energy spent, just to make sure they still feel valued. And this isn't love anymore. It's performance. It's obligation. It's keeping the peace so the relationship doesn't collapse under the weight of one person's needs. In relationships, this looks like the partner who prides themselves on how much they do for you but never asks how it feels to be on the receiving end, who uses the narrative of selflessness to avoid examining their expectations. In families, it's the parent who gave everything and now expects everything back, who brings up every sacrifice the moment you hesitate to give them more. In friendships, it's the person who shows up unasked, then holds the memory of their help over you forever, and you learn that being loved means being watched, measured, expected to match a level of devotion that was never truly free. You start to feel like love is a debt, something you must earn, repay, protect. You stop resting, you stop saying no. You forget what it feels like to have space that isn't laced with guilt. And still, they'll say it's love. They'll say no one else will care for you the way they do, that no one else will make you a priority like this, that they're only hurt because they love so deeply. And it sounds noble, beautiful even, till you realize that their love can't breathe unless it's constantly being validated, that their affection disappears the moment you step outside the lines. You're allowed to name that. You're allowed to say love shouldn't come with this much pressure. You're allowed to need balance, to want mutual care that doesn't tip into emotional debt, to want connection that doesn't ask you to prove your worth every time you rest. Real love doesn't make you choose between being loved and being free. It holds space. It respects limits. It doesn't keep score. It doesn't hurt you for taking time for yourself. It doesn't disguise possession as devotion. Because emotional damage doesn't always look like yelling or neglect. Sometimes it looks like someone giving you everything just so they can say they own your heart, just so you feel too guilty to ever walk away. When love looks like constant protection, they always want to protect you. They say it like it's a promise, like something beautiful. They check in often. They ask where you are, who you're with, what time you'll be home. They worry about you. They text to make sure you got there safely. They tell you it's because they care, because the world is dangerous, because they'd never forgive themselves if something happened to you. And at first it feels sweet, reassuring, like safety, like someone finally wants to hold you close and never let go, like someone is watching out for you in a world that's so quick to forget. You tell your friends they're just really protective. You say it with pride because it feels like love. But then the questions grow sharper, more frequent, more specific. Not just, are you okay? But Why didn't you tell me you were going out? Who's that in the photo? Why didn't you answer right away? What were you doing for 3 hours with no response? You start feeling anxious when you see their name light up your phone, not because you don't love them, but because you're already preparing your explanation. You start editing your stories. You start omitting little things to avoid conflict. You begin to calculate how your decisions will look through their eyes, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you know how easily they turn concern into accusation, and when you confront it, when you say you need space or privacy, they act hurt, like you're pushing them away, like you're the one turning love into distance. They say things like, "I'm only like this because I care," or "I just worry about you too much," or "I can't help it, you're everything to me." And suddenly, your boundaries feel like betrayal, like evidence that you don't love them enough, that you don't appreciate their protectiveness, that you don't understand how hard it is to care this much. And so you fold, you reassure, you explain, you give more access, more information, more time. You tell yourself, this is what love looks like. Being known so deeply, being watched so closely, being treasured so fully that someone can't bear to not know where you are. But what you don't realize is that you've stopped feeling free. You've stopped breathing fully. You've stopped being alone with your own life. Because everything you do now has another layer, their awareness, their opinion, their permission, and that's the emotional damage hiding inside constant protection. It's not always about control with cruelty. Sometimes it's control with care, with soft voices and loving eyes, with gentle reminders that sound like, "I'm just worried about you." But if worry always leads to restriction, if concern always leads to surveillance, if love always comes with conditions about who you see, where you go, and how much you explain, then that's not protection, that's possession. In relationships, this shows up when they use love as a reason to monitor you, when they say, "I just need to know everything because I love you so much." In families, it's the parent who checks your phone, tracks your location, calls repeatedly until you pick up, and tells you it's because they care, even when you're an adult. In friendships, it's the friend who gets upset when you make plans without them, who says they're looking out for you but is actually policing your choices. And the worst part is, it's hard to argue with, because it doesn't look like damage, it looks like devotion. It sounds like love, but real love doesn't require constant explanation. Real love doesn't replace your independence with anxiety. Real love trusts. Real love breathes. Real love wants you safe, but also free. You are allowed to say, "I love that you care, but I need space to make my own choices." You are allowed to say, "Your protectiveness is starting to feel like control." You are allowed to want room to exist without feeling watched, because love that always needs proof isn't protection, it's fear wrapped in closeness. And closeness that costs you your freedom will always feel like a cage, no matter how much they say it's built from love. When love looks like needing you too much, say you're everything to them, that they don't know who they'd be without you, that you saved them, that you're the only one who understands. At first, it feels powerful, special, like you've found a kind of love that transcends the ordinary, like your connection is deeper, more intense, more real than anything you've known before. They call you their safe place, their lifeline, their whole world, and it feels good to be wanted that much, to be needed, to be the person someone turns to for comfort, clarity, meaning. You feel important, valued, seen, but slowly the weight of that need begins to build. You start noticing that their emotions rest entirely in your hands, that your mood determines theirs, that your availability dictates whether they have a good day, that your silence, even if brief, causes them to spiral. They ask where you've been when you don't reply quickly. They say they can't sleep if you haven't talked that night. They say they just feel off when you're busy or distracted. They don't always say it with blame. Sometimes it comes wrapped in vulnerability, in trembling voices. It's messages that say, "I don't know what I'd do without you," or "I just feel so lost when you're not around." And because you care, you respond, you reassure, you show up. Again and again, even when you're tired, even when you're struggling, even when you need space but can't afford the guilt that would come with taking it, because you're not just their partner or their friend or their child anymore. You're their emotional oxygen, and now you can't exhale, you can't rest, You can't have a bad day without fearing how it will affect them. You can't take space without watching them unravel. You can't set a boundary without hurting someone who's told you they need you to survive. That's not romance, that's emotional dependence. And while it might look like devotion, what it really is, quiet emotional damage. Not because they're bad, not because they're manipulative, but because somewhere along the way, the relationship stopped being mutual, and you became their anchor, their therapist, their emotional regulator, and now your entire sense of peace is tied to whether or not they're okay, which means you're never really free. In relationships, this looks like the partner who says, "You're the only one I can talk to," and then leans on you for everything without ever learning how to hold themselves. In families, it's the parent who confides in you, like you're the adult, like you're the only one who gets it, like their emotional survival depends on your presence. In friendships, it's the person who breaks down when you cancel, who accuses you of abandoning them when you need time alone, who turns every moment of distance into a crisis. And the longer it goes on, the more you begin to believe this is what love looks like. That love means always being available. That love means absorbing pain. That love means being the strong one, no matter how much it costs. But real love doesn't consume. It doesn't cling. It doesn't make you responsible for someone else's mental health. Real love allows space. Real love lets both people breathe. Real love doesn't require you to be the only source of light in someone's entire world. You are allowed to say, "I love you, but I can't be everything for you." You are allowed to say, "Your pain is real, but I'm not your solution." You are allowed to step back, to draw a line, to choose balance over burnout, because needing someone too much isn't love, it's fear. And when fear disguises itself as love, it sounds like closeness, but it feels like suffocation. You deserve to be loved, not depended on like a lifeline. You deserve to be supported, not used as a shield against someone else's loneliness. And you deserve to take up space in your own life without feeling like someone else's world will fall apart because you finally took a breath. When love looks like constant forgiveness, they mess up again and again and again, but they always apologize. They always come back with the right words, the soft eyes, the regret, the sadness in their voice that sounds so sincere, so raw that it disarms you. They say, "I know I hurt you," or "I hate myself for doing this," or "I promise I'll do better." And you believe them because it sounds like accountability, because you want to believe people can change. Because love, you're told, is about forgiveness, about working through the hard things, about giving grace. And so you give it. You give them another chance. You remind yourself that no one's perfect, that relationships take work, that healing isn't linear, but then it happens again. Maybe not right away, maybe not in the same way, maybe a new variation of the same old pain. They raise their voice, they dismiss your feelings, they make a decision that cuts you out, and when you react, they look surprised, hurt even, like they didn't know you'd take it that way, like your pain wasn't part of the plan. And so the apology returns, familiar, well-rehearsed, tear-stained. "I didn't mean to. You know I love you. I'm working on it." And you find yourself holding their guilt instead of your own heartbreak. You find yourself comforting the person who caused the pain again, because you've been taught that forgiveness is noble, that forgiveness is strength, that if you love someone, you give them room to get it wrong, and again, and again, and again. But here's what you don't realize. You're not in a cycle of healing, you're in a cycle of harm. And forgiveness has become the glue holding it together. Not growth, not accountability, forgiveness. Forgiveness that's expected before the wound even has time to ache. Forgiveness that's required to keep the peace. Forgiveness that's weaponized as proof of love. And over time, your standards erode. You start negotiating with your own worth. You say, "They didn't mean it," or "They're trying," or "It could have been worse." You start doubting your own pain. You stop trusting your instincts. You start asking yourself whether you're being too sensitive, too dramatic, too unwilling to give grace, because every time they mess up, the conversation turns back to you, to your capacity to forgive, to your patience, to your heart, and that's how emotional damage hides behind kindness. When the focus shifts from their behavior to your response, when they hurt you and somehow you end up proving your love by how quickly you get over it, that's not intimacy. That's imbalance. In relationships, It looks like the partner who keeps crossing your boundaries and then crying about how bad they feel, who turns every confrontation into a moment where you're comforting them. In families, it's the parent who lashes out and then demands hugs without apology, who tells you, "You know I didn't mean it," and expects everything to go back to normal. In friendships, it's the person who keeps disappointing you and then says, "But we've been through so much, don't throw it away over one mistake." And one mistake becomes many, but they always say sorry. And you always say, "It's okay," even when it isn't. Even when the apology is just a pause between repetitions. Even when it's not followed by change. You are allowed to want more than a heartfelt "I'm sorry." You are allowed to say, "This keeps happening, and I can't pretend it doesn't hurt." You are allowed to ask for actions, not just apologies. Because forgiveness without boundaries becomes permission, and when love keeps asking you to forgive the same thing, it's not asking you to grow, it's asking you to shrink. You deserve love that doesn't depend on how much pain you can absorb without breaking. You deserve love that doesn't require you to be the bigger person every time, and you deserve to be with people who take your pain seriously the first time, not just when you finally stop forgiving. When love looks like constant sacrifice, they don't ask you outright. Not at first. They just admire how giving you are, how selfless, how understanding, how you always seem to put others first. They say things like, "You're so patient with me," or "I don't know how you handle so much," or "You're the only one who never complains," and you take pride in it because it feels like love to be seen that way, to be appreciated for your ability to give without limits, to be valued for how much you carry without breaking. But slowly, giving becomes the default. Not just something you do, it becomes who you are. You start shifting your schedule to fit theirs. You start letting go of your hobbies, your plans, your needs. You give up your space, your time, your comfort. You move things around to keep them happy. You lower your standards to avoid conflict. You compromise over and over again because it's not a big deal and they're just going through a lot, and that's what love is, right? You tell yourself relationships require sacrifice, that being in love means bending, means stretching, means setting yourself aside sometimes, and it's true, sometimes. But sacrifice, when it's constant, isn't love. It's erosion, it's quiet self-abandonment, it's shrinking yourself day by day until there's barely anything left to give. You find yourself exhausted, depleted, bitter. You wonder why you're always the one who gives more, who adjusts, who apologizes first, who makes things easier. And when you finally say something, when you say you're tired, when you ask for balance, they look confused, surprised, hurt. They say, "I thought you didn't mind," or "You've always been like this," or worse, "Now you're changing on me." And that's the emotional damage. That they didn't just get used to your sacrifices, they came to rely on them. They built their comfort on your flexibility, their ease on your exhaustion, their peace on your silence. And now, when you ask for something in return, they act like it's an attack because they mistook your selflessness for infinite capacity. Because they believed your love meant self-erasure. In relationships, it's the partner who says, "You're so low maintenance," while never asking how much you've had to swallow just to keep things running smoothly. In families, it's the parent who calls you the strong one while never noticing how much you've been silently carrying. In friendships, it's the friend who says you never need anything and uses that as an excuse to never show up for you. And the more you give, the less you're seen. Because the people who benefit from your sacrifices rarely stop to ask what they're costing you. But you know, you feel it. In the ache that never fully goes away, in the tension in your body when you agree to one more thing, in the quiet resentment building each time you bite your tongue, you are allowed to stop, to rest, to say no, to say, "I love you, but I can't keep disappearing to make this work." Because real love doesn't ask you to erase yourself. It doesn't keep score, but it doesn't ignore imbalance either. It doesn't call your boundaries selfish. It doesn't punish you for wanting reciprocity. It holds space. It shares the weight. It gives back. You deserve a love that sees your full humanity, not just the parts that are convenient. You deserve to be held to, not just by your own strength, but by someone else's willingness to meet you halfway. And you deserve to love yourself enough to stop calling sacrifice the same thing as love, when all it's ever really done is leave you empty. When love looks like jealousy in disguise. They say it's only because they love you that they can't help it, that they're just afraid of losing you. The jealousy shows up early, maybe even before you notice it. At first, it sounds playful. Who is that texting you? You always look amazing when you go out. I bet people notice. I just don't like the way they look at you. It's framed as a compliment, like your beauty is dangerous, like your light draws too much attention, like they just want to protect what's theirs. You laugh it off at first, you explain things they didn't ask about, you downplay interactions, reassure them, say, you have nothing to worry about, but eventually you stop laughing because it doesn't go away. The questions get sharper, the glance is more suspicious. You notice how they stiffen when you talk about someone else, someone they haven't approved of, how their voice changes when they ask, did they text you again? Or why didn't you mention that before? And slowly the space around you begins to shrink, not physically. Emotionally, you feel like you're being watched even when they're not in the room. You stop posting certain pictures, you avoid mentioning certain names, you let go of friendships they don't feel comfortable with, not because they said you had to, but because the aftermath is exhausting, the explanations, the subtle guilt, the tension in the air when you mention someone they've flagged as a threat, and they say it's love, they say it's because they've been hurt before. That trust takes time, that you're just too beautiful, too magnetic, too much of a catch. They make it sound flattering, like the jealousy is proof they care, but it doesn't feel like care, it feels like control, dressed in insecurity, wrapped in love language, reinforced by tears, by trembling voices, by accusations wrapped in, I just feel. In relationships, this looks like the partner who checks your messages just once, who always needs to know where you are, who becomes cold after you spend time with people they didn't approve of. In families, it's the sibling who resents your success but says they're proud. The parent who's uncomfortable with your independence but says it's because they want you safe. In friendships, it's the friend who suddenly pulls away when you get close to someone else, who says things like, I just don't want to lose you, while punishing you for loving anyone but them. And over time, you start believing it's your job to ease their jealousy, to manage their emotions, to predict what might trigger them. You become responsible for keeping their fear in check, even when that fear becomes a leash, even when that leash shortens every time you try to stretch. And that's not love. That's emotional damage pretending to be loyalty. Love doesn't shrink your world to fit someone else's insecurity. Love doesn't keep you from connection. Love doesn't make you feel like every conversation, every compliment, every friendship is a landmine waiting to be stepped on. You are allowed to say your jealousy makes me feel unsafe. You are allowed to say this isn't about love, it's about control. You are allowed to name the way it manipulates you into constant reassurance, into silence, into isolation. Real love is secure enough to let you shine. It's grounded enough to survive your freedom. It doesn't confuse closeness with possession. It doesn't need to know everything to trust you, and it never demands that you give up your world just to keep someone else's heart calm. You deserve to love and be loved without being cornered, without being suspected, without being asked to prove your loyalty every time you laugh or speak or connect with another soul. Jealousy is not love. It's fear dressed in romance, and you're allowed to walk away from anything that makes your life smaller under the name of keeping you close. When love looks like always being tested. They don't always say it out loud, but you feel it. Every conversation is a trial. Every disagreement is a test. Every mistake becomes a measurement of how much you care. You start to notice the patterns, how they say one thing but mean another, how they claim to be fine, but you know better than to believe that silence. How I don't care doesn't mean indifference. It means you're supposed to prove something. Prove your love, your attention, your guilt, and you do. Over and over again, you step into the game. You send the extra message. You call even when they said not to. You cancel your plans because you're afraid this time, if you don't, it'll be the last straw. You've learned how to read them like a storm on the horizon, how to feel the tension building long before it breaks, and it always breaks, eventually. Sometimes with anger, sometimes with distance, sometimes with a quiet withdrawal that leaves you chasing them for days, wondering what invisible rule you broke this time. They tell you they don't like drama, that they just want peace, that they don't ask for much, but you're exhausted. Because the peace only lasts as long as you play the part, as long as you guess correctly. as long as you pass the tests you didn't even know were being administered. In relationships, this looks like the partner who says, "If you really loved me, you'd know what's wrong," instead of telling you, who withholds affection to see how hard you'll try, who turns every misstep into evidence that you don't care enough. In families, it's the parent who says, "Let's see if you even remember my birthday this year," or "You never call me unless I call you first," as if connection only matters when you initiate it under pressure. In friendships, it's the person who disappears without warning just to see if you'll notice, then returns with, "I just wanted to see if you'd reach out." And the longer it goes on, the more your self-trust erodes. You begin to question everything you do. Was that message warm enough? Did you sound annoyed? Should you have said more? Should you have said less? You start apologizing preemptively. You start explaining things that don't need explanation. You start offering reassurances before they even ask. Because now, love doesn't feel like a place to rest. It feels like a series of checkpoints you have to pass to earn safety. And when you finally crack, when you finally say, "I can't keep walking on eggshells," they act like you're being unreasonable, like you're the one turning things into a game, like they never asked for any of this. And technically they didn't. That's the trap. The tests are never spoken, the rules are never clear, but the punishments are always real. You're allowed to say, "This feels like a test, not a relationship." You're allowed to say, "I need clarity, not mind games." You're allowed to stop proving your love over and over to someone who only seems to believe it when it costs you your peace. Real love doesn't make you perform, it doesn't rely on emotional riddles, it doesn't turn every quiet moment into a guessing game. It tells the truth, it asks for what it needs, it trusts you to be human, not perfect. You deserve a connection where communication isn't a trap, where silence doesn't mean punishment, where love doesn't feel like something that's always just one wrong move away from disappearing, because being tested isn't the same as being loved. And if you're always being tested, you're not in a relationship, you're in a classroom you never agreed to enter. When love looks like never letting you grow. They tell you they love you exactly the way you are, that they wouldn't change a thing, that you're perfect to them. And at first, it feels beautiful, rare, like safety, like finally being accepted after so many years of trying to measure up. They admire your quietness, your kindness, your loyalty. They say they've never met anyone like you, that you're grounded, that you're real, and for a while that love holds you, it protects you. It becomes the soft place where you finally exhale. You feel seen, you feel safe. But then something happens. You start to change. Maybe it's small at first. You take a class, you make a new friend, you express a new opinion. You want to try something different, something outside of the version of you they're used to, and their reaction shifts. It's not always obvious. Sometimes it's subtle. A pause, a silence, a dismissive joke. That's not really your thing, is it? Since when are you into that? You're not like those people, and now you feel it. The box, the version of you they fell in love with, or rather, the version they expect you to stay, the version that makes sense to them, the one that doesn't stretch, doesn't evolve, doesn't surprise, and suddenly every change you make feels like a threat, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you're doing something unfamiliar. You notice how their compliments become conditional, how their comfort seems to disappear when you start stepping into your own growth. They say you're just different lately, or you're not the same person I fell in love with, and they don't mean it as a compliment. They mean come back to the version of you that didn't dream too loudly, that didn't take up too much space, that didn't want more. Because now, your expansion makes them nervous, your change makes them insecure, your evolution reminds them that they might not be ready to grow with you, and so they try to tether you. With nostalgia, with guilt, with flattery that only applies to the past. Remember how things used to be? You used to be so grounded. I miss the old you. And you start questioning your own growth. You wonder if you're doing too much, if you're becoming someone no one will love. If maybe it's better to stay small, quiet, predictable, because at least then you were easy to hold. At least then the love stayed steady. But here's the thing. Real love doesn't flinch when you evolve. It doesn't ask you to stay still so it can stay comfortable. It grows with you. It learns you again and again. It gets curious, not cautious. And love that only exists in the safety of sameness isn't love, it's familiarity, it's control, it's comfort dressed as devotion. In relationships, this shows up when a partner resents your ambition, when they feel threatened by your confidence, when they start comparing the person you're becoming to the person you were when they first met you. In families, it's the parent who supports you until you start thinking for yourself, until you challenge their beliefs, until you move in a direction they don't recognize. In friendships, it's the person who celebrates you until your growth shines brighter than their own and then quietly distances themselves without explanation. You're allowed to grow, you're allowed to want more. You're allowed to become someone new, not because you weren't lovable before, but because growth is human, necessary, beautiful, and the people who truly love you won't see your growth as a departure. They'll see it as an invitation to know you again, to love you better, to walk beside you as you evolve. You are not too much for growing. You are not disloyal for changing. You are not unlovable for becoming more than you once were. You are simply alive, expanding, becoming, and anyone who asks you to stop isn't protecting the love, they're protecting their comfort, and you don't owe anyone your stillness just because they fear the movement. And when love looks like fixing you, they say it so sweetly, so gently. They say it like a kindness, like love, like they just want to help. They tell you they see so much potential in you, that you could be even better if you just worked on a few things, that they're only pointing it out because they care. I just want you to be the best version of yourself. I know you can do better. You're amazing, but imagine how incredible you'd be if you just changed this one thing. And at first it feels flattering, like someone believes in you, like someone is investing in you, like someone loves you enough to help you grow. But slowly, the compliments start to blur into criticism. You begin to notice how often they point things out, how often you're a project, how there's always something to tweak, something to upgrade, something that isn't quite enough yet. The way you speak, the way you dress, the way you react, the way you laugh too loudly or get too quiet or ask too many questions or don't ask enough, you start to second guess yourself. You hesitate before you share something. You rehearse your tone, you filter your thoughts, you try to beat them to the punch, to fix the thing before they have a chance to tell you how it could be better. And that's the trap, because now you're loving yourself less in order to maintain the illusion that someone else is loving you more, and you start to mistake their criticism for care, their discomfort for insight, their nitpicking for attention. You start calling it growth, but it's not growth, it's erosion. Slowly your self-trust dissolves. Slowly your joy becomes conditional. Slowly you lose sight of who you were before they started helping you. In relationships, this looks like the partner who always gives you feedback, even when you didn't ask for it, who makes you feel like their love is tied to your improvement, who keeps moving the goalpost just when you think you've done enough. In families, it's the parent who never stops parenting, who critiques every choice you make, every success, every haircut, every decision, as if their opinion is still a requirement for your self-worth. In friendships, it's the person who says, "I'm just being honest," but whose honesty always sounds like shame. And the worst part is, they might not mean harm. They might truly believe they're helping, that they're loving you the best way they know how. But if love always feels like a performance review, it stops feeling like love. And if someone only seems proud of you when you're in the middle of becoming someone else, you have to ask, who are they really loving? You're allowed to say, "I don't need to be fixed to be worthy of love." You're allowed to say, "That comment didn't help. It hurt." You're allowed to trust your own journey, your own pace, your own instincts, because the people who truly love you won't wrap criticism in affection. They won't act like you're broken just so they can feel needed. They'll meet you where you are, not where they want you to be. And they'll know that real growth doesn't come from shame, it comes from safety. You deserve a love that builds without belittling, that supports without sculpting you into a version that makes someone else feel more comfortable. You don't need to be edited, you don't need to be reshaped, you don't need to earn affection by becoming more palatable. The right love will never make you feel like a project. It will see you and stay. When love looks like emotional chaos. It's intense, always intense. The highs are sky high, the lows crash hard. There's passion, fire, longing, need. They look at you like you're the only thing that matters, like they can't breathe without you, like this love is something bigger than either of you can contain. And in the beginning, it's intoxicating. Every moment feels alive. Every kiss feels cinematic. Every fight feels like a storm that proves how deep the connection must be. They say things like, "No one else has ever made me feel this way," or "I've never loved anyone like this." You believe it because you feel it too. The chemistry, the pull, the way your emotions surge just being near them. You start thinking this is what love is supposed to feel like. Messy, unpredictable, all-consuming. But then the chaos starts to wear you down. The arguments that start from nothing, the tension that fills the room before a single word is spoken, the confusion you feel when one day they're obsessed with you and the next they're distant, distracted, unreachable. And every time you try to bring it up, they blame the passion. They say, "This is just how we are. This is what happens when you really love someone. We just feel too much, that's all." And so you stay, because breaking up would feel like abandoning something sacred, something rare, something real. But deep down, you know it's not just intensity, it's instability. Love shouldn't feel like walking through fire just to be close to someone. It shouldn't feel like you're constantly recovering from the last emotional explosion or bracing for the next. You start living in reaction, always anticipating their moods, always on edge, not because you don't love them, but because you don't know who they'll be from one moment to the next. They might say they're just passionate, that your connection is electric, that no one will ever understand the depth of what you two share. But intensity is not intimacy. Chaos is not closeness, and emotional damage doesn't become healing just because it's wrapped in love songs and late-night apologies. In relationships, this looks like partners who scream and sob and break things and then act like nothing happened, who say, "That's just how we fight," and call it normal, who only feel close to you in the aftermath when they're wiping away your tears and saying how much they need you. In families, it's the parent who explodes over the smallest thing and then acts overly affectionate the next day, leaving you constantly confused about where you stand. In friendships, it's the person who loves you deeply one minute, then ghosts you the next, and when they return, expect everything to be exactly as it was. And you start to internalize it. You start believing that real love is supposed to be like this, dramatic, unstable, volatile. You start measuring love in emotional scars, in passionate fights, in the way your heart races around them, not from excitement, but from nervousness. You are allowed to say, "This isn't passion, it's emotional chaos." You are allowed to want peace. You are allowed to want stability. You are allowed to choose love that doesn't require you to constantly recover. Because real love doesn't exhaust you. It doesn't burn hot one day and go cold the next. It doesn't confuse your nervous system so much that calm starts to feel like boredom. Real love is steady, it's grounding, it's safe. It doesn't test your limits to prove its strength. It doesn't create distance just so it can feel exciting again when it returns. You deserve love that doesn't set your world on fire just to keep things interesting. You deserve something soft, something steady, something that doesn't make you question whether today will be love or war. And when love looks like you owe them your time, it starts small. They ask for a little more of your time. They want to see you more often. They want longer calls, more messages, more of your energy. They say it's because they miss you, because they love being around you, because you make everything better. And at first it feels flattering. Who wouldn't want to be wanted like that? Who wouldn't want to feel so important, so central to someone else's life? You start rearranging your schedule, pushing things back, canceling plans. You make time for them, even when it's inconvenient, because it feels like love, like commitment, like the foundation of something real. But the requests don't stop. They increase. And slowly, "Can I see you tonight?" becomes, "Why weren't you available yesterday? I wish you'd stayed on the phone longer." Becomes, "You never have time for me anymore." And the line between affection and obligation starts to blur. Suddenly, your time doesn't feel like yours anymore. Every hour you spend without them starts to feel like a debt, something you'll have to answer for, something that'll come up the next time they feel neglected. You start planning your days around their needs. You check your phone constantly. You feel guilty for resting, for being busy, for doing anything they weren't a part of. You start apologizing even when you didn't do anything wrong, just for not being available, just for needing a moment, just for having a life that exists outside of them. And they always frame it as love. They say, I just want to be close to you. Is it wrong to want to spend more time together? I feel like I'm the only one making an effort. But it's not closeness they want, it's access, constant and limited access to you, and anything less feels like rejection. They don't want shared time, they want control over your time. And that's the emotional damage hiding behind devotion. When your presence becomes an expectation, when your absence is treated like betrayal, when you are no longer allowed to choose how and when to give your time without being punished emotionally. In relationships, this shows up when they keep a mental tally of how often you text first, how many hours you've spent together this week, how quickly you respond. In families, it's the parent who gets passive-aggressive when you don't visit enough, who acts hurt every time you say no, who expects your calendar to revolve around theirs. In friendships, it's the person who says you've changed, not because you've grown, but because your availability isn't what it used to be. And the more it happens, the more you start to bend. You spend less time with others. You stop pursuing your own interests. You shrink your world so they won't feel left out of it. And it starts to feel normal, like this is what love requires. Like being chosen means choosing them over yourself, every time. But real love doesn't demand all of you just to feel secure. It doesn't guilt you into staying connected. It doesn't turn your independence into abandonment. You are allowed to say, I need time for myself. You are allowed to say, my love isn't measured in hours spent or text returned. You are allowed to protect your time without justifying it. Because love should never feel like a time card you're constantly punching to keep someone happy. It should feel like freedom, like mutual choice, like two full people coming together. Not one person trying to prove their love by giving more than they have to give. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not how constantly available you can be. You deserve space to breathe, to live, to grow, without being made to feel like you're neglecting someone just because you remembered how to belong to yourself. When love looks like they always know what's best for you. They say they know you better than anyone, that they understand you in ways you don't even understand yourself, that they can see what you need, what you struggle with, what's holding you back. They don't say it with arrogance. They say it with love, with concern, with that warm, steady voice that makes it sound like they're just trying to help. They offer advice before you ask. They finish your sentences. They correct your memory of events, not harshly, but gently. That's not what you meant, they say. I know you better than that. You don't actually like that sort of thing. You always say you do, but then you change your mind. Trust me, I know you. And it sounds like closeness, like intimacy, like the kind of love that comes from really paying attention. So at first you lean into it. You let them speak for you. You defer to them when you're unsure. You start to believe that maybe they really do know what's best for you because they care, because they love you, because they see things you don't. But slowly, something shifts. Their voice gets louder in your mind. Yours gets quieter. You start to question your own decisions. You hesitate before saying what you want because you already know what they'll think of it. You don't order the food you crave because they say you never finish it. You don't wear the outfit you like because they once said it wasn't really your style. You don't go to the event because they say you never enjoy crowds. And you wonder, did you really change your mind? Or did you just internalize someone else's version of who you are? It's harder to tell because they're always so certain, so calm, so composed. And you, well, you're starting to forget what certainty even feels like. They say things like, I just know you better than anyone. You always get overwhelmed. You'll thank me later. You don't realize it, but this is good for you. And it doesn't feel like control at first. It feels like care, like protection, like someone steering you away from discomfort. But then discomfort becomes anything that contradicts their idea of you. And soon your life becomes a maze with invisible walls. Walls you didn't build, but walls you stopped testing. Because every time you push against them, they resist. Not with anger, with disappointment, with confusion. Why would you want that? That's not like you. Are you okay? And now your desire is not just questioned, it's pathologized. And that's the emotional damage hiding under the phrase, I know what's best for you. When love stops being something that sees you and starts being something that defines you, fixes you, contains you, In relationships, this looks like the partner who always makes the plans, who tells you how you feel before you've processed it yourself, who undermines your instincts by always offering a better one. In families, it's the parent who still tells you what career to pursue, what kind of partner to date, what lifestyle is really you long after you've grown. In friendships, it's the person who speaks for you in conversations, who assumes your preferences, who acts offended when you express something they didn't predict. And the more it happens, the more your self-trust begins to unravel. You start waiting for their input before making decisions. You feel anxious when you go against their advice. You worry that your choices will somehow hurt them, even when those choices are entirely about your own well-being. That's not love. That's identity theft disguised as intimacy. That's being molded instead of being met. That's emotional manipulation woven into the language of closeness. You are allowed to say, that may be how you see me, but it's not who I am. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to rediscover yourself. You are allowed to be inconsistent, unpredictable, evolving. You are allowed to disappoint the version of you that exists in someone else's mind, because that version was never your job to maintain. You are not a character in someone's story of you. You are the author of your own becoming. Real love doesn't narrate your experience for you. It asks, it listens, it welcomes contradiction, and holds space for the parts of you that shift and stretch and don't make sense yet. Because loving someone isn't the same as knowing everything about them. And knowing someone isn't a reason to override their choices. If someone's love feels like a rule book you didn't help write, if their certainty becomes a cage, you are allowed to walk away from that. You are allowed to reclaim your voice, your preferences, your messy, ever-changing self. Because you were not put on this earth to live inside someone else's version of your truth, you were meant to live your own, fully, loudly, unapologetically. And anyone who truly loves you will let you. When love looks like you're always the problem, they say it with concern, with a calm voice, sometimes even with a sigh that it makes it sound like they're tired, but patient. You're overthinking again. You're so sensitive. You always make things harder than they need to be. It doesn't sound cruel. It sounds like they're helping you see yourself, like they're giving you perspective, like they're showing you how to make things easier, how to be easier. And at first, you listen, because love means learning, right? It means growing. It means hearing the hard truths. You trust them. You let their voice echo in your mind. You start paying attention to your tone, to the way you react, to how you phrase things. You start asking yourself, am I too much? Did I make that worse? Should I have just let it go? And slowly you start changing, not because you feel free, but because you feel like you're the one who always disrupts the peace, the one who brings in the conflict, the one who stirs the pot even when you're just trying to be honest. Every time you bring up something that hurt, they flip it, not with rage. Not always. Sometimes it's confusion. Sometimes it's disappointment. Sometimes it's a quiet kind of logic that makes you feel irrational. I didn't say that. You must misunderstood. I think you're just projecting. You always think I'm trying to hurt you when I'm just being honest, and now you're on the defensive. Trying to explain your pain without sounding dramatic, trying to justify your feelings without upsetting the fragile balance of being reasonable. You start leaving parts out. You stop bringing things up. You learn that your honesty comes with consequences, that being too open leads to tension, that your emotions require translation because on their own, they're not taken seriously, and that's the emotional damage that hides behind these gentle critiques. When love becomes a performance you give, shaped entirely around someone else's comfort, when the burden of every misunderstanding falls on your shoulders, when the conversation is never about what they did, but always about how you reacted. In relationships, it's the partner who never apologizes because you took it the wrong way, who walks away during arguments, then says, I needed space and you couldn't respect that. In families, it's the parent who never admits they were wrong because, according to them, your emotions are always exaggerated. In friendships, it's the person who calls you too deep when you try to talk about something real. And over time, you internalize it. You start believing you're the one who always makes love difficult. You become afraid of being misunderstood. You start rehearsing conversations before they happen, just to make sure you don't sound like the villain. But here's the truth. You are not the problem just because you feel deeply. You are not the problem because you want clarity. You are not the problem because you asked for respect. Love isn't supposed to make you shrink. It's not supposed to train you to second-guess your own reality. You're allowed to say, this isn't about me overreacting. It's about how you made me feel. You're allowed to say, my feelings are valid even if they make you uncomfortable. You're allowed to take up space in the relationship, not just as someone who gives love, but someone who needs it in return. Because real love doesn't make you earn peace by silencing yourself. It doesn't ask you to carry all the blame. It doesn't confuse emotional manipulation with maturity. Real love holds your truth, even when it's messy, even when it's hard, even when it reflects something back that someone else doesn't want to see. If you always feel like you're the issue, like you're walking on eggshells, like everything would be fine if you could just feel a little less, need a little less, speak a little softer, you're not in love. You're in damage control. You deserve better than a connection that only exists when you're quiet enough not to disturb it. You deserve a relationship where your pain matters, where your side of the story is heard, where the resolution isn't always you surrendering. Love isn't supposed to make you feel like you're broken just for having boundaries or wrong just for being human. When love looks like keeping you dependent, they help you a lot. They're always there. They offer advice, fix problems, step in when things get hard. They take care of the details. They manage what you forget. They offer solutions before you even realize there's a problem. And at first it feels like love, like being supported, like someone finally sees how overwhelmed you are and just wants to lighten the load. You start to rely on them. It's natural. They're so good at knowing what needs to be done. They have answers when you're uncertain. They step up when you falter. They take care of you in ways no one ever has. And it feels safe until it starts to feel like something else, until their help becomes a habit, then an expectation, then a requirement, until your ability to do things on your own starts to fade, not because you can't, but because they always step in before you get the chance. And when you do try to do something for yourself, they're there, watching, commenting, critiquing, gently of course, but enough to make you doubt your way, enough to make you hesitate before trying again. They might say, why don't you let me handle that? Or, you always get frustrated when you try that on your own. Or, I just want to make things easier for you. And it sounds kind, it sounds loving, but what they're really doing is reinforcing the idea that you can't be trusted with your own life, that you're safest when you let them decide, that things only work when you follow their plan. You start to feel unsure of yourself, not just in the relationship, but everywhere, in work, in friendships, in the way you move through the world. You begin to hear their voice in your head before your own. And when you make a choice without them, when you act independently, they react. Maybe not with anger, maybe not with punishment, but with discomfort, with withdrawal, with quiet disappointment that makes you feel like you've done something wrong. Like love depends on obedience, like autonomy is betrayal. In relationships, this shows up when your partner manages you with kindness, when they control the money, the plans, the decisions, and frame it as care. In families, it's the parent who never lets go, who makes your choices for you well into adulthood under the banner of protection. In friendships, it's the person who offers constant advice, who inserts themselves into your life with support that actually feels like surveillance. And over time, the damage is subtle but deep. You start shrinking your world to fit their comfort. You stop exploring new ideas because they've already made up their mind. You hesitate before asking for help from anyone else because this person has trained you to believe they're the only one who truly understands you. That's not love, that's emotional dependence. Manufactured, reinforced, maintained. You're allowed to say, I appreciate your support, but I need space to figure this out myself. You're allowed to say, I want to trust my own decisions, even if they're imperfect. You're allowed to rebuild your confidence, even if it means stepping away from someone who's made themselves indispensable, because love shouldn't make you dependent. It should make you stronger, bolder, more connected to yourself. It should empower you, not replace your instincts, not suppress your independence under the weight of just trying to help. Real love sees your potential. It nurtures your growth. It cheers for your self-trust. And it doesn't disappear the moment you start standing on your own. You are not ungrateful for wanting space. You are not selfish for needing to choose your own path. And you are not wrong for feeling like something is off, even when the care looks good on the surface. Emotional damage doesn't always come with insults or neglect. Sometimes it comes with gentle voices, with constant favors, with soft control that makes you question whether you can function without them. But you can. You always could, and the right kind of love will remind you of that without needing you to forget it first. When love looks like they're the victim every time. You try to talk about something that bothered you, something they said, something they did. You're careful, gentle, you don't accuse, you just explain. You share how it made you feel. You use I statements, you try your best to keep it calm, to keep it loving, but almost immediately you feel the shift. Their face drops, their voice gets quiet. They look hurt. I didn't know you saw me that way, so I'm the bad guy now? I can't believe you think I'd ever try to hurt you. And now you're not talking about your pain anymore. Now you're talking about theirs. Now the room is filled with their emotions, their disappointment, their sadness, and somehow without realizing it, you're the one apologizing. You're saying, that's not what I meant. You're saying, I didn't mean to make you feel attacked. You're saying, please don't be upset. I just wanted to be honest. And they nod slowly, like they're doing you a favor by forgiving you for confronting them, like you created the wound just by naming yours. And that's the twist. That's the damage. When love becomes a place where your feelings are threats, where your honesty makes you the aggressor, where any attempt to talk about hurt turns into a rescue mission for their self-esteem. At first, you don't notice the pattern. It all feels so emotional, so raw. You think maybe they're just sensitive, maybe they're scared, maybe it's hard for them to be wrong. But then it happens again and again. Every conflict becomes a detour. Every boundary you try to set becomes an attack they have to survive. They say things like, I guess I'm just a terrible person, or you always see the worst in me, or nothing I do is ever enough for you. And now you're defending them instead of defending yourself. Now you're comforting the person who hurt you. Now you're holding their emotions while yours sit quietly in the corner, waiting for a turn that never comes. You begin to dread difficult conversations. You start rehearsing your words. You ask others if you're being unfair. You wait until the perfect moment, when they're calm, when they're open. But even then it ends the same way, with you feeling like you did something wrong just for needing clarity. That's not conflict resolution. That's emotional reversal. That's manipulation, even if it's unconscious, and it chips away at you, slowly. You learn that peace only comes when you keep quiet, that the relationship works better when you're the one who bends, that being understood means hurting them first and then apologizing for it. In romantic relationships, it's the partner who cries every time you bring up your needs, who says you're attacking them when you're just asking for help, who gets so overwhelmed that you end up backtracking just to calm things down. In families, it's the parent who says, after everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me, the one who turns every confrontation into a guilt trip. In friendships, it's the person who disappears after you express disappointment, then returns days later demanding reassurance that you still care about them. And what makes it hard is that they're not always being malicious. Sometimes they really are fragile, sometimes they really do feel devastated, but that doesn't make it okay. That doesn't mean you should have to carry the full weight of both your pain and theirs every time something needs to be said. Real love doesn't make you regret being honest. Real love doesn't collapse into self-pity the moment it's challenged. Real love says, I hear you, not how could you. You are allowed to say, this isn't about blaming you. It's about how I feel. You are allowed to say, please don't make this about your pain when I'm trying to share mine. You are allowed to have hard conversations without being made to feel cruel. Because your needs don't make you the villain. Your truth doesn't mean you don't love them. Your disappointment doesn't erase your devotion. And you shouldn't have to twist yourself into silence just to keep someone else from falling apart. If every time you speak up, they fall down, then what they're really saying is only love me when I feel safe. Only love me when I don't have to grow. But that's not love, that's fear. And you are not responsible for managing someone else's fear at the cost of your own voice. You deserve a love where pain can be named without becoming a performance, where both people get to speak, where accountability isn't a threat, it's a pathway back to trust. When love looks like they're always keeping score. They remember everything, every favor they've done for you, every sacrifice they've made, every time they let something go. and they remind you, subtly at first, in passing, with a smile, remember when I stayed up all night helping you? I've always supported your dreams, you know that, right? I dropped everything for you when you needed me. You thank them, you do, because it meant something to you. You felt it, you needed it, and they were there. But eventually it becomes clear that the help was never just kindness, it was currency. And now they're collecting, slowly, strategically. When you ask for something new, they say, after everything I've done for you? When you're upset about how they treated you, they say, I can't believe you'd bring that up after all I've sacrificed. And now, instead of hearing you, they hold your past in front of you like a shield, like a receipt, like proof that they've loved you more. The more, given more, that you by comparison have no right to ask for anything else, you start to hesitate before bringing things up. You start keeping your own mental list, not to win, but to protect yourself. You start measuring every interaction, every favor, every mistake. You begin to wonder if you're doing enough, giving enough. If your love is being measured in numbers, how many times you cooked dinner, how many nights you were there, how many times you forgave without making a scene. Love becomes a balance sheet, not an exchange of care but a tally. And you're always behind. No matter what you give, they remember what you didn't. No matter how present you are now, they bring up the one time you weren't. And you begin to notice how often you're apologizing, not just for recent things, but for old things, tiny mistakes that have been kept alive in their memory, pulled out at just the right moment to make you feel small again. You forgot my birthday 2 years ago. You weren't there when I needed you that one time. You always put yourself first, back then. And suddenly, you're back on defense, again. And again, and again. It's exhausting. You start to dread conflict, not because of the fight, but because of the archive. The way they'll bring up things you thought were resolved, the way they'll remind you that you've failed before, so how dare you be disappointed now? In relationships, it's the partner who keeps score of your flaws while expecting a clean slate for theirs. In families, it's the parent who reminds you of every meal, every bill, every sacrifice as a reason why you're not allowed to have needs now. In friendships, it's the person who says, I've always been there for you, as a way to silence you when they fall short. But real love doesn't keep receipts. It doesn't weaponize memory. It doesn't treat care like a contract. Real love gives without calculating return. Real love doesn't build a case against you every time you fall short. It invites repair, not repayment. You're allowed to say, I don't want to be in a relationship where everything I do is measured. You're allowed to say, love isn't a debt I owe. You're allowed to love from abundance, not guilt. You deserve relationships where giving doesn't come with a ledger, where your mistakes aren't stored up like ammunition, where the love you receive today isn't used as leverage tomorrow, because scorekeeping is not connection, it's control. It's a quiet form of punishment, wrapped in the language of fairness, and it will make you feel like no matter how much you love, you're always behind. You are not behind. You are not failing. You are not less worthy because someone refuses to let the past rest. You are allowed to grow, to learn, to start again, and anyone who truly loves you will meet you here, in this moment, not in the endless archive of what they've done or what you didn't. Let love be present. Let it breathe. Let it be mutual, without math. When love looks like they always know better than you. They don't yell. They don't insult you. In fact, they often speak gently, calmly, like they're just trying to help, like they're offering wisdom, like they see the bigger picture that you can't. They frame it as guidance. You're overthinking it. You'll see what I mean eventually. Just trust me. I know what I'm talking about. And at first it feels like support, like they have your back, like they're more experienced, more grounded, more certain of how things work. So you listen. You let them take the lead. You begin to defer to their opinions even when your gut says something else, because love means trusting, right? Love means giving them the benefit of the doubt. But over time, something changes. You realize that your input rarely matters, that when you offer ideas, they dismiss them. Not aggressively, not cruelly, just enough to let you know they've already decided. You'll say, I think we should, and they'll say, that's not really the best way. You'll offer feedback and they'll cut you off with, no, you're not seeing it clearly. You'll share how you feel and they'll reframe it. You're just emotional right now. That's not what's really going on. You're misreading the situation again. And suddenly you start to doubt yourself, your instincts, your logic, your ability to understand your own experiences. You begin to silence your thoughts before they're even spoken. You tell yourself, they probably know better anyway. You tell yourself, they're just smarter, wiser, more composed, and soon you forget what your own voice sounds like. You shrink your input to match the shape of their certainty. You stop contributing not because you have nothing to say, but because you've been taught that your perspective is always missing something, always slightly off, always in need of their correction. And that's the damage, when love becomes a lecture, not a conversation, when being with someone means being continually guided, corrected, improved, not because you ask, but because they've decided you need it. In relationships, this looks like the partner who dominates every decision, who explains your own feelings to you, who believes their way is the right way every time. In families, it's the parent who still talks to you like you're 12, who refuses to acknowledge your adulthood, who assumes your mistakes are signs you haven't grown. In friendships, it's the person who always has a better story, a better solution, a better opinion, and reminds you of it constantly. And maybe they mean well, maybe they truly believe they're helping, but help that comes at the cost of your voice isn't help, it's hierarchy. And love that always positions you as the student and them as the teacher isn't partnership, it's power imbalance dressed in affection. You are allowed to say, I hear your perspective, but I trust mine too. You are allowed to say, please don't talk to me like I'm always wrong. You are allowed to want a love that makes room for your thoughts, not one that talks over them. Real love doesn't interrupt your process, it walks alongside it. It says, what do you think? And waits for the answer. It honors the fact that your lived experience matters, that your insights are valid, that your intuition is trustworthy. Love doesn't need to prove it's smarter. It doesn't need to win the conversation. It doesn't need to always be right. It needs to listen, to learn, to leave room. Because when someone always knows better than you, what they're really saying is that they know you better than you know yourself. And that is not intimacy, that is quiet erasure. You deserve love that believes in your voice, that lets you lead sometimes, that makes space for your thoughts even when they differ, because you are not someone who needs to be corrected at every turn. You are someone who deserves to be heard fully, without conditions, without edits, without the subtle weight of someone else's certainty pressing your truth into silence. When love looks like they always need saving, they always seem to be struggling, life is always hard, the timing is always bad, there's always something going wrong, and you're the one who understands them, the one who sticks around when no one else does, the one who knows their heart, their past, their pain. They say, you're the only person I can really talk to. No one else gets me like you do. You're the reason I'm still standing. And at first, it feels meaningful, like purpose, like connection, like you've found something rare, someone who trusts you so deeply, they're willing to show you their brokenness. And because you're kind, because you care, you show up. You stay up late talking through their problems. You adjust your schedule to support them. You lend your emotional energy, your time, your stability. Again and again, you give, you love, you hold the heavy things. But over time, it doesn't get lighter. Their pain doesn't seem to heal. Their chaos doesn't calm. In fact, it starts to grow. And what once felt like a partnership now feels like a rescue mission you didn't know you signed up for. Every time you try to talk about your needs, the conversation comes back to theirs. Every time you need support, they're unavailable, too tired, too overwhelmed, too lost in their own problems. You begin to notice a pattern. Their life is always a crisis. Their emotions always take up more space. Their pain is always louder than your peace. And when you ask for balance, they don't get angry, they get wounded. I thought you cared about me, so now I'm a burden? I guess I was right. Everyone leaves when I need them. And now you're apologizing for needing anything at all. Now you're comforting them for making you feel small. Now you're holding their pain in yours, silently, because love means being there, right? Love means showing up even when it's hard. But here's the truth. Love doesn't mean disappearing to save someone else. It doesn't mean sacrificing your well-being just to keep them afloat. If you are constantly the anchor in someone else's storm, but they never learn how to swim, that's not partnership. That's emotional exhaustion disguised as intimacy. In relationships, this looks like the partner who makes their pain the center of the relationship, who always needs help but never helps you, who constantly spirals and pulls you in to catch them. In families, it's the parent or sibling who leans on you emotionally even when you're the one who should be receiving support, who guilt trips you into staying close, staying quiet, staying small. In friendships, it's the person who only calls when they're falling apart, who disappears when they're fine and expects you to drop everything when they're not. You start to forget what peace feels like. You start to feel guilty for wanting rest. You start to question whether your needs are just too much on top of everything they're already dealing with. And that's the damage. That's what love looks like when it becomes a project, when their suffering becomes your identity, when your worth is tied to how much you can fix. You are allowed to say, I care about you, but I can't be your lifeline. You are allowed to say, you need support I can't give alone. You are allowed to say, your pain matters, but so does mine, because love should never require self-abandonment. Real love isn't built on the idea that one person must save the other. It's built on the understanding that both people are allowed to be whole, allowed to have needs, allowed to rest. And if someone needs you broken in order to keep them together, that's not love, that's emotional dependence. You are not selfish for setting boundaries. You are not cruel for needing balance. You are not heartless for refusing to carry someone through a healing journey they won't walk for themselves. You are human. You are allowed to feel tired. You are allowed to feel lost. And you are allowed to choose peace, even if it means walking away from someone who only knows how to be close when they are broken. Because love should not only exist in the middle of someone else's chaos. Love should make space for your quiet too. When love looks like they make you doubt your memories. Not start with big lies. It starts with little rewrites, tiny edits of moments you thought you remembered clearly. You say, remember when you said that? And they say, that's not what I said. You say, you got really upset that day. And they say, no, you're misremembering. You were the one who got upset. It's subtle, polite even. They're not calling you a liar. They're just clarifying, just reminding you how things really happened. And because they say it so confidently, so casually, you begin to wonder, maybe they're right, maybe your memory's off, maybe you misunderstood. You start questioning yourself. You replay old moments not to remember them, but to make sense of them again through their version. And each time you bring something up, the story shifts. You're told you're too sensitive. You're told you misunderstood the tone. You're told you're projecting. And slowly, the version of reality you once trusted begins to blur. You stop trusting your instincts. You stop trusting your emotional responses. You stop trusting your own mind. That's not love. That's manipulation. That's gaslighting, the kind that doesn't always look obvious because it's dressed in concern, not cruelty, in logic, not rage. They don't scream at you. They don't belittle you. They just calmly explain why you're wrong, over and over again. And each time they do, you feel a little less certain, a little less grounded, a little more dependent on their version of things to feel sane. You begin to second-guess everything. Did they really say that? Were they actually mad? Did I overreact? Should I even bring it up again? And eventually you stop bringing things up altogether, because if the past can always be rewritten, what's the point of trying to hold it accountable? In relationships, this looks like the partner who never takes responsibility, because every mistake they make somehow gets edited out of the final version. In families, it's the parent who denies the pain they caused, who says, that's not how it happened, even when your entire body remembers it clearly. In friendships, it's the person who changes the narrative whenever they're confronted, who says you're being dramatic or emotional instead of owning what happened. And the damage, it's not just in the moment, it's long after. It's in the way you start keeping evidence for every interaction, screenshots, journal entries, voice notes, just in case you have to prove to yourself later that what you experienced was real, that your emotions were valid, that your memory isn't broken. Because when someone loves you like this, what they're really doing is trying to control the story, not just of your relationship, but of your reality. And that's not connection, that's psychological disorientation. You are allowed to say, that's how I experienced it. You are allowed to say, my memory is valid, even if it doesn't match yours. You are allowed to trust your own timeline, your own emotions, your own understanding of what happened. Because love that requires you to abandon your own truth isn't love, it's gaslighting dressed as guidance. Real love listens, real love considers, Real love makes room for your story, even when it's messy, even when it's different, even when it's hard to hear. You deserve to feel steady in your mind. You deserve to speak without needing receipts. You deserve to be believed, not because you have proof, but because your word is enough. And anyone who makes you feel like your memories are unreliable simply because they don't match theirs is not trying to love you, they're trying to erase you, and you are not someone who can be erased. Your truth matters, your experience matters, and you deserve to hold onto both. When love looks like they always need you to be the better one. They praise you for your patience, for how calm you stay when things get hard, for how you never raise your voice even when you're upset. They say you're the one who grounds them, that you're more emotionally mature, more understanding, more together. And at first it feels good, like you're appreciated, like your strength is noticed, like they see the work you've done to grow, to stay composed, to be kind, even under pressure. But then it becomes a role, an expectation, a mold you can't step out of. You're the stable one, so you're not allowed to crack. You're the reasonable one, so you're not allowed to feel deeply, to get messy, to express the kind of anger or grief or fear that's natural in close relationships. Because if you do, everything falls apart, because you're the one who holds it all together. And they've come to rely on that, on you. You start to notice how often they fall apart in moments of tension, how easily they react, say hurtful things, withdraw, shut down, or escalate. But then they turn to you to fix it, to de-escalate, to apologize first, to soothe the conflict. They call it balance. You're just better at this kind of thing, they say. I get too emotional. You're the strong one. You're better with words. I don't think like you do. You know that. And suddenly your emotional labor becomes the foundation of the relationship. You are the therapist, the regulator, the adult in every moment of stress. And when you do finally express frustration, when you break down, they can't handle it. They call you scary, or dramatic, or cold, or cruel, or worse, they fall apart even harder. And now, instead of being met with care, you're managing their spiral. Again, you begin to fear your own emotions. You begin to hide them, not just from them, but from yourself. You tell yourself, it's not worth the reaction. I don't want to hurt them. They need me to be strong right now, and the role becomes permanent. You become their emotional scaffolding, and they never learn how to stand on their own. In romantic relationships, this looks like the partner who storms out during an argument, knowing you'll be the one to reach out, who lashes out, then waits for you to soothe the tension, who depends on your self-awareness to excuse their lack of it. In families, it's the parent who leans on you emotionally, even though you're the child, who praises your maturity while never acknowledging the burden that comes with it. In friendships, it's the person who's always in crisis and always expects you to show up without falling apart yourself. And over time, you begin to feel alone, not because no one is there, but because no one is holding you. You begin to resent how little space you have to be human. You begin to forget what it feels like to be comforted, to be allowed to be the one who's falling apart, to be met with patience instead of demands. And that's the emotional damage hiding inside the pedestal. When love comes with the condition that you always be the one who's okay, you are allowed to say, I'm not the strong one today. You are allowed to say, I need to fall apart too. You are allowed to ask for emotional equity, not just emotional praise. Because being capable doesn't mean you should always carry the weight. Because love is not a role to perform, it's a space to rest. A place where you don't have to earn gentleness by being invincible. Real love doesn't just admire your strength, it supports your softness. It steps in when you're tired. It shares the emotional load instead of assuming you'll always carry it. You don't have to be the better one to be loved. You don't have to be the calm one, the forgiving one, the patient one, the healer. You're allowed to be messy, to get it wrong, to need repair, and the right person won't leave you alone in that moment. They'll meet you there, because love isn't about who can hold more, it's about who's willing to hold each other. When love looks like they say, it's just who I am. They say it when they disappoint you, when they hurt you, when they forget something important, or shut down during a conversation that matters. That's just how I am. You knew this about me. I've always been like this. And at first you try to understand, Because love means acceptance, right? It means meeting people where they are. It means loving someone through their flaws. You remind yourself that no one is perfect, that everyone has baggage, that their past shaped them, that maybe they're still learning how to show up. So you give them grace again and again. You forgive the outbursts, the distance, the inability to apologize, the way they never quite meet you where you are emotionally, and every time you express discomfort, they respond with a version of the same message, I'm not changing. They don't say it harshly. Sometimes it's wrapped in sadness, in regret. I wish I were different. I hate that I always do this, but it always ends the same way, with you adjusting, with you shrinking around their unchanging shape, with you lowering the volume of your needs just to keep the peace. You stop asking for more. You stop expecting follow-through. You stop dreaming of a different kind of relationship, one where emotional growth is shared, not stalled, because they've convinced you that what they've shown you is all they'll ever be. And if you want to stay, you'll have to live with that. In romantic relationships, this looks like the partner who refuses therapy, who shuts down instead of communicating, who disappears emotionally when things get hard and says, I'm just not good at this. In families, it's the parent who never apologizes, who says, that's just how I was raised, that's just how I talk. In friendships, it's the person who never checks in, never follows through, and then says, I've always been bad at keeping up. But the damage isn't just in what they refuse to change, it's in what you're forced to give up in order to stay. You begin to doubt your standards. You begin to see your needs as too demanding. You start telling yourself, maybe I expect too much. Maybe this is just what love looks like, but it's not. Love is not stagnant. It's not fixed in stone. It's not an identity someone wears to excuse the pain they cause. Real love grows. Real love adapts. Real love doesn't say, this is who I am, deal with it. It says, this is where I am, and I'm willing to meet you in the middle. You are allowed to say, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to try. You are allowed to say, your history doesn't give you a free pass to keep hurting me. You are allowed to want a relationship that evolves, one where growth isn't a threat, it's a goal. Because when someone says, it's just who I am, what they're really saying is, my comfort matters more than your pain. And that's not love, that's convenience. You don't need to become smaller to stay in someone's static story. You don't need to carry the cost of their unwillingness to grow. You are not high-maintenance for wanting change. You are not unloving for wanting more. And you are not asking for too much when you ask for effort. You deserve to be with someone who sees love as a journey, not a defense. Someone who doesn't hide behind their habits. Someone who doesn't expect you to bend so they don't have to stretch. Because love isn't just about being accepted as you are, it's about being inspired to become better together. When love looks like they guilt you into staying. They don't beg, not with tears, not with desperation. Instead, they use softness, they use history, they use everything you've shared, everything you've built as quiet leverage. You say you're unhappy, that something feels off, that you're tired, and they don't argue, they just look sad, just disappointed, just wounded. After everything we've been through, they say, I thought we were stronger than this. I can't believe you'd give up on us. And suddenly the conversation is no longer about your needs. It's about your loyalty, your commitment, your willingness to endure. They don't scream, don't leave. Instead, they whisper, you owe it to us to try harder. And you hesitate because you remember all the memories, all the good days, all the moments when love felt real and full and alive. You think of how they were there for you once, of how they supported you during a hard time, of how, in your most vulnerable moments, they held you when no one else did, and the guilt starts to bloom. You feel it in your chest, in your stomach, in your hesitation to take the next step. You ask yourself, am I being ungrateful? Am I giving up too soon? Am I being selfish? And they don't answer those questions, but their silence does. Their sadness does. The way they bring up old memories like a shield does. And the worst part? It doesn't feel manipulative. It feels emotional. It feels human. They seem like someone who's hurting, and maybe they are. But your empathy becomes the chain that keeps you still. You stay. Not because you're happy, not because the issues are resolved, but because leaving would make you feel like the villain in a story you've been trying so hard to write together. You begin to ignore the part of you that's screaming for space. You tell yourself love is supposed to be hard, that maybe all relationships are like this, that maybe this is the price of history, of shared lives, shared years, shared hearts. But here's the truth. Staying out of guilt isn't love. It's survival. It's self-erasure. It's emotional damage masquerading as commitment. In romantic relationships, this looks like the partner who constantly reminds you of the time they supported you, paid for you, helped you through something, and now expects your permanent devotion in return. In families, it's the parent who says, "After everything I gave you, this is how you repay me." In friendships, it's the person who says, "You've changed," when you try to set boundaries, who makes you feel like walking away is betrayal. And over time, this kind of love teaches you to associate care with guilt, connection with sacrifice. You start believing that loving someone means carrying them even when it breaks your back. You are allowed to say, history isn't a reason to stay in pain. You are allowed to say, I can be grateful for what we had and still know it's time to go. You are allowed to choose your future over your past, because love that relies on guilt isn't rooted in freedom, it's rooted in fear. The fear of being alone, the fear of being blamed, the fear of being seen as cold or cruel or ungrateful. But real love doesn't guilt you into staying. It invites you to choose it, freely, fully, repeatedly, not because you owe it, but because you want it. You deserve a love that welcomes your autonomy, that doesn't dangle your memories like chains, that doesn't twist your gratitude into a leash. You deserve to stay in something because it feels right, not because you're afraid of being labeled the one who left. And if leaving brings guilt, it doesn't mean you're doing the wrong thing. It means you're human, with a heart, with compassion, with the ability to honor what was and still walk toward what could be. That's not betrayal, that's courage. When love looks like they control through care. It sounds thoughtful, gentle, protective. They don't yell, they worry. They don't demand, they just want what's best for you. They say, I'm only looking out for you. You know I care, I'm just trying to help. And at first, you believe them. Because it does look like love. They check in, they remember the little things. They give you advice before you even ask. They help you avoid mistakes. They tell you how to handle situations, how to dress, how to speak, who to trust, what to focus on. They offer direction at every turn, like a built-in compass designed just for your benefit. But slowly the line between care and control starts to blur. You make a decision they don't agree with, and suddenly they're upset, not because it hurt them, but because it wasn't good for you. You make plans without checking in, and they say, why didn't you tell me? You set a boundary, and they say, I thought we trusted each other. And now their care feels less like support and more like surveillance. You begin to notice how uncomfortable they get when you don't follow their advice, how quickly they withdraw when you show independence, how their concern grows louder any time you express a desire that doesn't align with theirs. You say, I want to try something new, and they respond with, I don't think that's a good idea. You say, I think I can handle this, and they say, I know you, and you're not ready for that. And at first it feels like love wrapped in caution, but soon it starts to feel like love that only exists if you obey. Love that evaporates the moment you step outside the lines they've drawn. In relationships, this looks like the partner who chooses your outfits, books your appointments, screens your friends, all while saying, I'm just taking care of you. In families, it's the parent who doesn't listen, only instructs, who says, I know you better than you know yourself. In friendships, it's the person who gives you unsolicited advice constantly, then sulks if you don't take it. And the worst part? When you confront it, when you try to explain how suffocating it feels, they act hurt. I'm sorry for caring. I guess I just won't help anymore. You're pushing away the only person who truly has your back, and now the guilt creeps in. You wonder if you were too harsh, if maybe you should have just listened. If this is what love really looks like, someone holding your hand so tightly it hurts, but calling it safety. But that's not care. That's control dressed in affection. Real care empowers. It offers help, not direction. It supports choices, not replaces them. You are allowed to say, I know you care, but I need to make my own decisions. You are allowed to say, your help feels more like pressure than support. You are allowed to want freedom in your love, not just safety. because being cared for shouldn't feel like being caged. You deserve a relationship where concern doesn't come with conditions, where love doesn't mean giving up your voice in exchange for someone else's version of what's right. You deserve to trust yourself, to grow, to learn from your own experiences, even if that includes mistakes. Real love doesn't steer you, it walks beside you. It doesn't whisper doubts into your independence, it celebrates it. You are not ungrateful for needing space. You are not cold for asking to breathe. And you are not difficult just because you want love that lets you lead your own life. Control isn't love, it's fear. And someone else's fear should never get to dictate your freedom. Let care feel like wings, not a leash. When love looks like they decide what you deserve. They say they know what's good for you. They say you don't always see your own worth, that you don't know how to choose what's right. They frame it like insight, like they see something in you that even you don't. You settle for less. You don't have the best judgment. You deserve more, and I'm here to make sure you get it. And at first, it feels like love, like advocacy, like someone finally stepping up and saying, you don't have to do this alone. It feels like being lifted, like being valued, like someone has your back. You feel safe, guided, supported. They do things for you, big and small. They make decisions without asking, but with good intentions. They choose your meals, they handle the bill. They speak on your behalf. When you ask why, they say, because you'd never ask for it yourself, because you always downplay your needs, because I know what you really want. And in the beginning, that confidence is alluring, comforting, especially if you've been overlooked before, especially if you've struggled to advocate for yourself. You think, finally, someone sees me, someone is paying attention. But then you start to feel crowded, like you're being guided down a path that doesn't quite fit. You say, I'm not comfortable with this, and they say, trust me, you'll thank me later. You express a different preference, and they say, you're just afraid to want more for yourself. And slowly, your own voice starts to feel irrelevant, not silenced, just replaced. They still speak of love, still act with confidence, but the decisions are no longer about what you want, they're about what they believe you should want. They start deciding what kind of friends you should keep, what kind of job you should pursue, what kind of life you should be building. You deserve better than them. That job isn't right for you. That's not the kind of thing someone like you should settle for. And maybe they're right sometimes. Maybe their insight is helpful here and there. But what begins to unravel is your sense of agency, your ability to choose even if your choice isn't perfect, because instead of being supported, you're being steered. It's subtle. They don't take away your power with force. They take it away with praise, with the idea that you're being cared for, that you're finally being loved the way you always should have been. But here's the catch. Love that requires you to surrender your voice isn't love. It's ownership. It's a story where you're not the main character anymore. You're the one being shaped, not the one shaping. You're the one being led, not the one walking with. In romantic relationships, this looks like the partner who insists on handling everything, money, schedules, goals, because they say you don't manage things well. In families, it's the parent who tells you what kind of partner you should choose, what kind of future you should chase, all while claiming, it's because I believe in you. In friendships, it's the friend who dismisses your feelings because they say, you always undervalue yourself. I'm just here to keep you on track. And the damage? It's quiet. It doesn't always scream. It seeps in. You start doubting your instincts. You start second-guessing your decisions. You begin to feel guilt when you go against their advice, not because it was wrong, but because they made it sound like you were betraying your own worth. You wonder, do I even know what I deserve anymore? Am I just sabotaging myself again? You start outsourcing your intuition. You start waiting for their approval before moving, and slowly the cost of their care becomes clear: your independence. You are allowed to say, I want to choose for myself, even if I get it wrong. You are allowed to say, I appreciate your support, but I don't need to be managed. You are allowed to trust your process, your pace, your preferences, because real love doesn't decide what you deserve. It helps you remember that you deserve to decide. It doesn't tell you what's best. It walks beside you while you find out. Real love doesn't manipulate your self-doubt to make you grateful. It reminds you of your power so you never forget it again. When someone constantly says they know what's best for you, what they're really saying is, I trust my version of you more than I trust the real you. But you are not a project. You are not someone to be shaped into their ideal. You are not half finished. You are not incomplete without their direction. You are whole, and you have the right to learn what's best for you through your own lived experience. You don't need a savior. You need space. You need support that empowers, not controls. Encouragement that uplifts, not replaces. You are allowed to live a life that reflects your own choices, even if those choices are messy, even if they change, even if they take time to make sense. And the person who truly loves you, they'll stay with you through that. Not above you, not ahead of you, but beside you. Because that's what real love does. It doesn't declare your worth. It reminds you that it was yours all along. When love looks like they only love the good version of you. They say you're amazing, that you're the calm one, the patient one, the one who's easy to be around. They praise how strong you are, how steady, how forgiving. They call you the glue, the light, the reason they feel sane. You're their peace, their soft place, their better half. And at first it feels beautiful, empowering, like someone finally sees your goodness, like someone finally notices how hard you try to be kind in a world that often isn't. You feel appreciated, special, loved, but slowly something starts to shift. You realize they only say those things when you're behaving, when you're quiet, when you're agreeable, when you're patient, even when you're hurting. They celebrate the version of you that doesn't complain, that doesn't push back, that always smiles and lets things slide, the version that swallows disappointment instead of expressing it, that folds instead of confronts, that forgives before they even ask. And the moment you crack, the moment your voice rises or your tone shifts or your eyes stop sparkling with grace, the love changes. You see it in their body language. You hear it in their voice. What's wrong with you today? You're being dramatic. I don't even recognize you right now. And just like that, the pedestal turns into a prison. You realize the love was never for all of you. It was for the version of you that never made them uncomfortable. They don't love your anger. They don't love your disappointment. They don't love your boundaries. They call it an off day. They call it you acting out. They say, this isn't like you, as if the version of you who speaks up doesn't deserve the same tenderness as the one who stays silent. And so you start editing yourself. You begin to pause before expressing anything that could be read as difficult. You choose your words carefully. You shrink your emotions into bite-sized pieces. You ask yourself, will this make them pull away? You start to measure your worth and how easy you are to love. You apologize for feelings before you even share them. You forgive quickly, not because you're ready, but because you're afraid their love won't survive your pain. You prioritize harmony over honesty. You pretend things didn't bother you just to keep things smooth. And slowly, you stop being whole. In romantic relationships, this looks like the partner who adores you when you're calm and stable, but withdraws or criticizes the moment you become human. In families, it's the parent who praises your composure but shuts down when you cry too long or ask for something they don't want to give. In friendships, it's the person who loves your support but distances themselves when you express a need of your own. And the worst part, they frame it as love. They say, I just miss the old you. You used to be so grounded. You're not acting like yourself lately. And you start to wonder, have I changed? Am I broken? Or have I just stopped performing? Because that's what this is, a performance, a daily script you follow to stay inside the version of you they know how to love, the version that doesn't challenge, that doesn't break down, that doesn't need anything beyond what they're comfortable offering. But you're allowed to outgrow the role. You're allowed to say, I'm not always calm, I'm not always patient, I'm not always okay, and I shouldn't have to be to feel safe in love. Because real love doesn't only show up when you're easy to love. It stays when you're messy. It stays when you're grieving. It stays when you're angry, confused, scared. It doesn't leave the room every time your humanity walks in. You are allowed to say, I want to be loved when I'm not performing. I want to be held even when I'm hard to hold. I want to be safe enough to be real. because your wholeness deserves love, not just your gentleness. Real love doesn't punish you for having range. It doesn't turn cold when you express pain. It doesn't walk away the moment you stop pretending everything's fine. It says, even now, I'm here. Even in this, I still choose you. And if someone only stays when you're their ideal version of you, they don't love you. They love what you do for them. They love the comfort you provide. They love the reflection of themselves in your restraint. You deserve more than that. You deserve a love that sees the full spectrum of your being and doesn't flinch, that doesn't panic when you raise your voice, that doesn't disappear when your sadness stretches longer than a day, that doesn't reduce you to your easiest traits and discard the rest like they're defects. You are not too much. Not when you're angry, not when you're tired, not when you're unsure of yourself, not when you push back or ask for more or break down in the middle of the day for no clear reason. You are not only worthy of love when you're shining, you are worthy in the dark, in the silence, in the mess. Let that be the standard. Not love that asks you to shrink, but love that invites you to be everything you are, even the parts you've been taught to hide. Because you are not a mood to manage, you are not a role to perform, you are a person, whole, unfinished, beautiful in every version. And the right love, it won't just tolerate your edges, it will hold them gently without trying to file them down. When love looks like, they keep you in their debt. They say things like, after all I've done for you, and I was always there when no one else was, and you wouldn't have made it without me. And at first you feel grateful because maybe they were there when things were hard. Maybe they did show up when no one else did. Maybe they did help when you felt like falling apart. And so you say thank you, you mean it too. You carry that gratitude in your chest. You remember their sacrifices. You hold their kindness close. But over time, something starts to feel different. Something starts to feel heavy because they keep bringing it up. Not always directly, but enough to remind you that their help wasn't just help, it was a currency, and you owe them. Now they may not say it like a bill, but they say it like a story. They keep telling a story where they are the hero, and you are the saved, where they gave, and you received, and now that story follows you into every disagreement, into every boundary, into every moment where you try to stand on your own. You say no, and they say, after everything I've done, you ask for space and they say, I guess you forgot who was there for you. You try to move forward and they pull you back into the past, reminding you of the moments you were most vulnerable as proof that you should stay humble and obedient and small. And suddenly love feels like a transaction, like a contract, like a quiet debt you're never allowed to pay off. You start giving more than you want to because you feel guilty when you don't. You start swallowing your feelings because speaking up feels like betrayal. You stop asking for anything new because you haven't finished thanking them for what they already gave. And the worst part is how they frame it. They say, I'm not asking for anything, but they still make you feel selfish when you don't comply. They say, you don't owe me, but every tone, every look, every pause says otherwise, and now your gratitude has turned into guilt, and your love has turned into a leash, and you wonder if you'll ever be allowed to feel equal again in romantic relationships. This looks like a partner who reminds you that they stayed when things were bad and now expects you to put up with whatever they give because that's fair. In families, it's the parent who says, I gave you everything, but can't handle you becoming your own person. In friendships, it's the person who says, I was there when no one else was, and uses that as a pass to disappear when you need them now. And over time, you start keeping score too, not to win but to survive, because love has become math, and you're always trying to balance the numbers to make the guilt go away. But here's the truth. Love isn't debt, and kindness isn't a contract, and support isn't a lifelong IOU. You're allowed to say thank you for being there, and still say, this doesn't feel fair anymore. You're allowed to appreciate the past and still want freedom in the present. You're allowed to stop paying for something you never asked for in the first place, because real love gives without keeping you in its shadow. It doesn't use your past weakness to control your current choices. It doesn't hold generosity like a weapon. It doesn't count favors and call that loyalty. You deserve a love that doesn't make you earn peace by living in guilt, that doesn't rewrite care as a favor you must repay forever, that doesn't call it betrayal when you grow into someone who needs different things. You deserve to feel free, even in gratitude, and safe even in memory, because love that comes with strings isn't really love, it's a trap wrapped in a thank you, and you are allowed to step out of it without shame. When love looks like you're always the one who has to fix things. They say you're good at handling problems. They say you're the one who always keeps things from falling apart. They say you're the one with the clear head, the calm heart, the steady hand, and maybe they're right. Maybe you have learned to be the peacemaker. Maybe you have learned to find the words that bring things back down to earth. Maybe you've spent years learning how to smooth over conflict, how to read between silences, how to carry the weight of emotion so nobody else has to. And they admire you for that. They praise you for it. They say things like, I don't know what I'd do without you, and you always know how to bring me back, and you're the only one who gets me. And it feels like love. It feels like trust, like closeness, like being essential. But slowly, it stops feeling mutual because you begin to notice that the emotional repair always starts with you. You're always the one to initiate the hard conversations. You're always the one to soften first, to say I'm sorry first, to ask, are we okay? Even when you're not the one who broke it. And when you don't, they wait, they stay distant, they stay cold or confused or shut down until you finally crack and go to them again and again and again. And suddenly, what looked like love starts to feel like a test, like a trap, like a game with only one move, and it's always yours. And when you try to change that, when you say, I want you to come to me first this time, they say, I didn't know you wanted that, or I didn't want to make things worse, or I figured you'd come around like always. And you realize they don't see it as imbalance, they see it as your job. And now you don't know how to stop doing it because every time you don't, everything breaks, everything stretches and stays stretched. And your silence doesn't bring repair, it brings punishment. It brings more distance, more confusion, more quiet. And you start to believe maybe this is just how it works. Maybe you really are the only one who can fix things. Maybe your love is measured in how much you're willing to reach across the gap again and again and again. In romantic relationships, this looks like a partner who doesn't apologize, who waits you out, who never follows up, who only engages emotionally after you've done all the heavy lifting. In families, it's the parent who expects you to bridge the gap no matter who caused the fracture, who calls you the strong one as a way to avoid accountability in friendships. It's the person who ghosts you until you send the message, who forgets your pain but always needs your care. And over time, you begin to associate love with exhaustion, with effort, with emotional labor that never seems to end. You begin to wonder if peace is something you always have to earn, if connection is something you have to chase, if wholeness is something only you are responsible for building. And that's the damage. When love teaches you that being close means being constantly in repair, when you're the builder and they're just the one who lives in the house, you keep fixing. But here's the truth. Love is not maintenance you do alone. It's not one person patching holes while the other one watches. It's not your job to always reach across the silence. It's not your responsibility to always be the glue. You are allowed to say, I want to feel like someone else is working on this too. I want to know that you see the cracks and care enough to act. I want to stop feeling like if I let go, everything falls apart. You are allowed to want to be met, not just admired, not just relied on, not just leaned on, but met halfway, because real love doesn't make you the mechanic of every repair. It doesn't keep you trapped in the role of the fixer. It doesn't reward you for emotional labor while offering nothing in return. Real love says, I see the damage and I want to help heal it. Real love doesn't just wait to be comforted. It reaches to, it moves to, it tries to. And if someone only calls it love when you're the one doing all the reaching, then what they really love is your effort, not your peace. And you are not a repair shop for other people's growth. You are a person who deserves to be held, not just depended on. When love looks like you're always being compared. They don't say it directly, not at first. They say things like, my ex never got upset about this, or my mom used to do it that way, or you're more emotional than most people. And at first you brush it off because comparisons happen, right? Everyone's had past experiences. Everyone brings stories into new relationships. But slowly you start noticing the pattern. The comparisons keep coming, not in anger, not in insults, but in quiet sideways comments, in subtle tones, in pauses that sting more than any shout ever could. They compare how you cook, how you handle stress, how you react in conflict, how you express affection, how you process pain. They compare how fast you forgive, how long you talk, how much you need. They compare without asking if it's fair. And they always seem to land on the side where you fall short. You're either too much or not enough. Never quite right. Never quite like the person before, or the idea in their head, or the version of you they think you should be. And you start to feel small, not because they say you're wrong, but because they keep holding up mirrors that don't reflect who you are. You begin to wonder if you're disappointing them, if you're failing some silent test, if you'll ever be good enough. And now every time you do something you think will matter, you hear the unspoken question, how does this compare? Is this better? Is this worse? Is this finally what they want? And you start changing, not out of growth, but out of fear, not because you're evolving, but because you're performing, trying to escape the shadow of people you've never met, or versions of yourself you've never agreed to be. And slowly, your authenticity slips away. You don't say what you really think. You don't act on your instincts. You edit your love to sound more like what they seem to admire and less like your own truth, and the damage grows quiet, like dust in the corners of a room, like water under a door, because comparisons don't always hurt loudly. They erode. They wear down your confidence, your clarity, your ability to trust that who you are is already worthy. In romantic relationships, this looks like a partner who holds old lovers like trophies or uses their past to justify their present indifference. In families, it's the parent who praises your sibling while asking why you can't be more like them. In friendships, it's the person who always talks about other people's loyalty while questioning yours without cause. And what makes it worse is they call it harmless. They say, I didn't mean anything by it, or you're reading too much into it, or I was just trying to give you perspective. And now you feel ashamed for feeling hurt, for being sensitive, for wanting to be seen on your own terms. Not through the lens of comparison, but through the clarity of your own light. You are allowed to say, please stop comparing me. You are allowed to say, I want to be known for who I am, not who I am not. You are allowed to ask for love that stands still and sees you clearly, not love that is always glancing sideways, looking for someone better, someone quieter, someone more convenient. Because real love is not a ranking, it's not a scoreboard, it's not a highlight reel of past people and missed chances. Real love is presence, attention, rootedness. It's the decision to meet the person in front of you without dragging ghosts into the room and asking them to compete. You don't have to earn love by outshining a memory. You don't have to twist yourself into a shape that looks more like who they used to know. You get to be yourself, fully, loudly, unapologetically, and if someone needs to compare you constantly to appreciate you, then they don't see you, they see an idea, and love built on ideas, not individuals, will never hold up, because eventually you lose yourself trying to meet expectations you never agreed to carry, and you deserve more than that. You deserve to be chosen, not because you're better, but because you are you, and that should be enough. When love looks like they decide what counts as real pain. They listen when you talk, but only halfway. Their eyes soften when you're smiling, but harden when you start to cry. They ask what's wrong, but only if it's something they consider valid, something big, something that makes sense, something that doesn't inconvenience them. They ask what happened, but if you say, I'm just tired, or I feel off today, they blink slow, they nod once, and say, well, everyone's tired, or don't overthink it, or you're just being dramatic. And just like that, the space where your emotions were supposed to land is gone. It closes up, it vanishes, and now you're sitting there holding your own pain, wondering if maybe it really isn't that deep, if maybe you really should just shake it off, if maybe your feelings are too much for even the person who says they love you the most. They don't scream at you. They don't shame you outright. They just subtly rank which emotions deserve airtime, and yours always seem to fall somewhere near the bottom. They say things like, you're always in your head, or this again, or you're still upset about that. And now you feel foolish, not just for hurting, but for having the nerve to say it out loud. You start hiding it. Better, you start answering, I'm good. Even when you're unraveling inside, you start choosing silence, not because you want to, but because you've learned it's safer than vulnerability. That goes unheard in relationships. This looks like a partner who consoles you when it's about work stress or family drama, but withdraws when the pain comes from them, who listens with empathy to strangers but rolls their eyes when your voice cracks. In families, it's the parent who tells you, "You had it easy," or "That's not real trauma," or "You don't know what hard is," as if pain needs a permission slip before it's allowed to exist in friendships. It's the one who's always there for the big things, but absent for the small things, who only shows care when it fits their definition of struggle. And what hurts the most is how subtle it is, because they still hug you. Sometimes they still say, "I'm here," but only for the pieces of you they recognize and approve of, only for the emotions they've already made space for. And everything else, the quiet grief, the strange anxiety, the soft ache that never quite leaves your chest, that gets left in the dark, and you begin to internalize the message. If they don't believe it's real, maybe it isn't. Maybe you're broken. Maybe you feel too much. Maybe you're the problem. And that's where the damage takes root, when love turns into a courtroom, and your feelings are always on trial when you have to build a case, just to cry when you have to defend the fact that you're hurting at all. But here's the truth: pain doesn't need permission, and feelings don't need justification, and love doesn't get to decide what counts and what doesn't. Love just sits with you, holds the silence with you, honors the ache with you. Real love doesn't rush you back to normal. It doesn't filter out the uncomfortable parts. It doesn't audit your suffering based on how convenient it is to witness. You are allowed to feel deeply without apology. You are allowed to say, "This hurts," even if it wouldn't hurt someone else. You are allowed to be met with care, not correction, not dismissiveness, not judgment. Because the kind of love that heals doesn't try to fix you. It just stays. It just sees you. And if someone only shows up for the pain they understand and ignores the rest, they're not really showing up. They're managing you. And you are not meant to be managed. You are meant to be met fully, wildly, completely, even in the moments that don't make sense, even in the moments that seem small. Because pain is never small when it's yours, and love should know that without you having to prove it. When love looks like they always get the final word, that they let you speak, they let you explain, they let you pour your heart out in long sentences full of trembling truth and shaky hope and quiet pain, and then when you're done, when you finally said everything you've been holding in, they speak, and their words come sharp or cold or clean and absolute, like a door being closed. They say, "That's not how it happened," or "I think you're overreacting," or "We're not going to talk about this anymore." And just like that, it's over. Not the problem, not the pain, just the conversation, the permission to keep exploring, to keep feeling, to keep being heard. It's over. They've decided what's real, what matters, what's worth their energy, and what isn't. And that decision is final. And now your story, your reality, your side, it all hangs in the air, unacknowledged, unfinished, unresolved. And you're left sitting there replaying everything, wondering if you could have said it better, softer, quicker, wondering if maybe next time they'll listen longer. If you just keep trying and they don't raise their voice, they don't lose control, they just decide that the discussion is done. And it feels calm, but it leaves a bruise. Because calm without care isn't peace, it's power. And when someone always gets to have the final word, what they're really saying is, "Your truth doesn't have a place here." And slowly you start to notice it's a pattern. Every time you bring something up, they wrap it in logic or dismiss it with silence or counter it with a memory that makes you feel like the villain or the child or the one who always ruins the mood. And every time you try again to speak, to share, to open a window, they find a way to close it, not with slamming, not with shouting, but with a statement so firm you don't know how to climb over it. And now every conversation feels like a courtroom where they're the judge and you're the one trying to defend your right to feel, and you begin to speak less, you begin to edit more, you begin to say only what you think won't be argued with, and eventually you stop bringing up the things that matter altogether, not because they don't matter, but because you're tired of hitting the wall of their final word. In romantic relationships, this looks like the partner who always ends the fight with a phrase that feels like a period even when you're still mid-sentence. In families, it's the parent who says, "I said what I said," or "This discussion is over," before you ever felt heard. In friendships, it's the person who gives you one chance to explain and then decides whether you're still worth talking to based on how neat and tidy your truth sounds. And the damage is that you start to believe the problem is in your expression, not their unwillingness to receive it. You start to doubt your own story, not because it's untrue, but because it was never validated. And when your truth is always cut off, always reinterpreted, always replaced with their version of events, you begin to feel like a stranger in your own life. You are allowed to say, this isn't a debate. You are allowed to say, I'm not looking for a verdict, I'm looking for understanding. You are allowed to ask for conversations that don't end the moment they become uncomfortable. Real love doesn't need to win. Real love doesn't need to be right. Real love doesn't treat communication like a contest. It holds space, even when the truth is messy, even when the pain is inconvenient, even when the resolution isn't immediate. And if someone always needs to have the final word, they're not trying to love you, they're trying to control the narrative. And you are not a story that needs rewriting, you are a voice that deserves to echo fully, not just be heard but held. And love, the kind that heals, the kind that lasts, never ends, with one person walking away thinking that only their words mattered. When love looks like they call it too much every time you need more, you open up slowly, cautiously. Honestly, you say you need something, maybe more time, maybe more care, maybe more presence, maybe just a little softness in the way they speak to you when they're tired. And instead of listening, they sigh. Instead of staying, they shift. Instead of leaning in, they say, why does everything have to be so intense with you? Or, you're too emotional. Or, you always want more. And just like that, your need becomes a burden. Your honesty becomes a flaw. Your heart becomes something too large, too inconvenient, too messy for their version of love. And it doesn't matter how gently you speak or how clearly you explain, they always respond like your request is unreasonable, even when it's small, even when it's human, even when it's the kind of thing anyone should be able to ask for. And at first you defend it, you say, I'm not asking for too much, or this is important to me, or I just want to feel closer. But eventually you stop fighting because every time you do, they look at you like you're asking for the world. And so you start shrinking your needs. You start convincing yourself you don't really need what you thought you did. You start watering yourself down into someone they won't accuse of being needy. And now love has become a game of self-restriction, a puzzle of what you're allowed to feel, what you're allowed to say, what you're allowed to want. And the more you withhold, the more they seem to like you. The more agreeable you are, the more they call you easy. The more you disappear, the more they say, I love you just the way you are. And you realize they only love the version of you that doesn't ask for anything, the version that stays quiet, that smiles on cue, that lets them be exactly who they are while asking you to keep adjusting who you are. And the message becomes clear. Needing less makes you more lovable. And so you begin to build your identity around restraint. You call it being chill or independent or low maintenance, but inside there's a storm. There's a version of you that's aching to be known, aching to say, this isn't enough for me. But you bury that voice because you're afraid of what it will cost you. You're afraid they'll say, see, this is what I mean, or why can't you just be happy? And you'll be back at the beginning, back at the part where your longing is met with distance, where your openness is punished and not rewarded. In romantic relationships, this looks like a partner who withdraws every time you try to go deeper, who says, you're never satisfied. When you're just asking to be held longer. In families, it's the parent who says, we gave you everything, but can't be bothered to ask how you're really doing. In friendships, it's the person who calls you too much behind your back when you cry, when you ask for time, when you need reassurance, and slowly that label becomes part of your skin. And the damage is you stop asking at all. Not just from them, but from the world and from yourself, because you start believing maybe you really are too much, maybe your softness is excess, maybe your needs are a nuisance. But here's the truth, your need is not the problem. Their inability to hold it is. You are not too much for wanting to be known. You are not too much for wanting consistency. You are not too much for wanting love that shows up without needing to be begged for it. You are allowed to say, I want more, and I won't apologize for it. You are allowed to want a love that doesn't flinch when you cry, that doesn't retreat when you speak, that doesn't shrink when you expand. You are allowed to be fully human and still be held. You deserve a love that doesn't feel like you have to earn your place in it every day, a love that doesn't make your desire for connection feel like a liability, a love that doesn't call your needs too loud just because it's never learned how to listen. And if someone makes you feel like you're too much, then they were never capable of enough. And that's not your failure, that's their limitation. And you are still worthy of everything you've asked for, even if they couldn't give it to you. When love looks like they rewrite the story so you're always to blame. They say they don't want to argue, they say they just want to understand, they say they're trying to make sense of what happened, but somehow every conversation turns into a narrative where you're the one who caused the damage, even when you were the one who got hurt. Even when you brought up something small, something honest, something human, by the end of the exchange, you're the one apologizing. You're the one explaining yourself. You're the one being told you always do this, or this is just like last time, or I can't talk to you when you're like this. And you realize the way they remember things doesn't match the way you experience them at all. And at first you think maybe it's just different perspectives. Maybe they're just seeing it another way. But over time, the pattern becomes clear. You say they ignored you, and they say you were being cold. You say you felt disrespected, and they say you were overreacting. You say you were trying to express a need, and they say you were attacking them. And little by little, your truth is overridden, not with rage, not with insults, but with calm logic, with firm tone, with a quiet confidence that makes you doubt yourself, and you start wondering, am I really that sensitive? Did I make it up? Was I too harsh? Did I twist their words? And now, instead of standing by your memory of what happened, you start filtering your reality through their story, and their story always ends with them being misunderstood. And you being the one who made everything worse. In romantic relationships, this looks like the partner who never says sorry, who turns every mistake into a conversation about how you handled it badly. In families, it's the parent who forgets the harm they caused but remembers every time you lashed out in frustration. In friendships, it's the person who ghosts you for days and then says, well, you didn't reach out either. When you finally ask why they disappeared and slowly the truth begins to feel like a moving target, you begin to think maybe your version isn't reliable. Maybe you can't trust your own reactions, your own instincts, your own emotional memory. And that is the damage. Not just that they don't take responsibility, but that they rewrite things so convincingly you start thinking you're the unreliable one. And now you find yourself rehearsing before every conversation, collecting evidence for every feeling, trying to make sure you won't be painted as the villain again, trying to make sure this time your truth will survive the rewrite. But love shouldn't require you to defend your reality. It shouldn't feel like a courtroom where every feeling you express gets cross-examined. You are allowed to say, this is how it felt to me, and be believed. You are allowed to say, I don't agree with your version, and not be punished. You are allowed to trust your own memory, your own body, your own sense of what happened, because real love doesn't need to win the story. It needs to understand the person. And if someone always has to be the one who's right, always has to shape the story to keep their hands clean, always has to flip the script to make you the antagonist, then what they love is control, not truth. And you are not here to carry someone else's unwillingness to be accountable. You are not here to be the character in the redemption arc while your pain gets edited out. You are allowed to walk away from conversations where your voice is being reshaped into something it never was, because your truth matters, even if it's inconvenient, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it makes them look in the mirror and flinch. The people who truly love you will make room for the full version of what happened, not just the one where they come out looking better. And you deserve that kind of honesty, that kind of safety, that kind of mutual remembering, where love is built not on edits, but on understanding. When love looks like they use your fears against you. They listen closely in the beginning, they ask about your past, they ask about your triggers, they ask what's hurt you before, and you tell them, not because you're careless, not because you're naive, but because you believe that love means opening up. Love means letting someone see you fully, even the messy parts, even the scared parts, even the pain. You don't show to most people, and they hold it gently at first. They say, that must have been hard. They say, I would never do that to you. They say, thank you for trusting me. And you feel safe for a while. You feel like you finally found someone who sees you, someone who won't step on the cracks, someone who understands how to love you without cutting the wounds deeper. But over time, things begin to shift. The things you shared in softness come back sharper, colder, repurposed, and weaponized, not in explosive moments, not in shouting matches, but in subtle interactions, in carefully chosen silences, in lines said just loud enough to sting you. Say, "I feel like you're pulling away," and they say, "You're just paranoid, like always." You say, "I need more reassurance sometimes." And they say, "You're too needy, you're never satisfied." You say, "That tone reminds me of something from before." And they roll their eyes and say, "Here we go again with your trauma stuff." And now your fears aren't just dismissed, they're turned against you. You begin to hesitate before expressing anything even mildly difficult. You begin to hold back the second layer of every feeling. You start scanning every moment for the possibility that what you say today might be used against you tomorrow. And you realize this love, this person, this relationship has become a place where your softest parts are no longer safe in romantic relationships. This looks like a partner who brings up your childhood wounds mid-argument to win. In families, it's the parent who says you've always been the dramatic one. Every time you express pain in friendships, it's the one who says, "Don't turn this into another abandonment issue," when they know that's exactly what it feels like, and now the very things you shared for closeness are being used to keep you quiet, to make you feel ashamed, to make you believe your pain is the problem. And the damage is deep because it teaches you to mistrust your own honesty. It teaches you that being vulnerable is dangerous. It teaches you that even in love you have to stay guarded, and now you're caught in a loop. You want to be close, but closeness feels unsafe. You want to be honest, but honesty feels like a setup. You want to be seen, but not if it means being punished for being human. And slowly you begin to disappear, not all at once, but piece by piece. Your softness goes first, then your openness, then your hope that someone will ever really hold you without hurting you. You are allowed to say, "Just because I shared my fears with you doesn't mean you get to use them against me." You are allowed to say, "I opened up for connection, not manipulation." You are allowed to want a love that respects your truth, not just in comfort but in conflict, because real love doesn't exploit your weaknesses, it protects them. Real love doesn't make your past a punchline or your wounds a weapon. It holds your hand even when you're shaking, even when your history makes things complicated, even when your fears need more tenderness than logic can give. And if someone turns your vulnerability into a disadvantage, if they twist your honesty into ammunition, then they were never trying to understand you, they were trying to control you, and you deserve more than that. You deserve love that makes your softness feel sacred, not risky. You deserve to speak your truth without wondering what it will cost tomorrow, and you deserve to be held by someone who sees your scars and chooses to be gentle, not because it's easy, but because it's love. When love looks like you always have to prove you're worth keeping. They say they love you, they say you matter, they say you're important, but their love feels like something you have to constantly earn, something fragile, something that might slip through your fingers if you're not careful. So you become careful, very careful. You measure your words, you weigh your reactions, you walk on eggshells, not because they're angry, not because they're cruel, but because their affection feels conditional, and you don't want to do anything to break the conditions. They compliment you after you've done something helpful, after you've calmed them down, after you've agreed with them, after you've made their day easier. But when you're messy, when you're upset, when you say no, when you set a boundary, when you bring up something uncomfortable, they pull back even if they don't say it directly. You feel the shift, the silence, the sigh, the way their tone flattens, the way they stop reaching out, and suddenly you're apologizing not for doing something wrong, but for doing something real. And you start to internalize the idea that love is something you have to keep proving, that if you stop giving, if you stop pleasing, if you stop being perfect, they'll stop loving. And that belief starts to shape everything you do in romantic relationships. It looks like bending yourself into a version they'll praise, never complaining, never asking for more, never letting the mask slip. In families, it's being the responsible one, the peacekeeper, the achiever, the child who doesn't cause trouble because you learned early that love had to be earned with obedience or excellence. In friendships, it's being the one who always shows up, always listens, always gives, but never asks for anything back. And over time, this dynamic carves something out of you. You start to lose the ability to believe in unconditional presence. You start to question anyone who stays even when you're not at your best. You look at their kindness and think, how long will this last? And worse, you start performing in your own life, always asking, am I enough? Am I lovable? now. Did I do it right today? You turn love into a test, and you're always grading yourself, and the damage runs deep because now you're not only afraid of abandonment, you're afraid of being seen too clearly, of being loved without conditions, because you've never learned how to let that in without suspicion. You are allowed to say, I want to be loved even when I'm not making things easy. I want to be wanted when I'm still figuring things out, when I'm messy, when I'm tired, when I don't have anything to give, because real love doesn't measure you. It doesn't score your value. It doesn't say you're worthy only when you're convenient or useful or performing at your best. It says you're worthy because you're you, and it stays not just when you're impressive, but when you're in pieces, not just when you're strong, but when you need help, not just when you're light, but when you're dark too. If someone makes you feel like you always have to prove your place in their life, then that's not love. That's a contract, and you are not a contract. You are a human being with flaws and needs and limits, and you deserve to rest inside a relationship without the fear that one wrong move will cost you everything. Love should be where you exhale, not where you hold your breath. When love looks like they only stay if you stay small. They say they love you just as you are. They say you're perfect to them. They say they don't want you to change, but when you start to grow, something shifts. When you get louder about your needs, when you become clear about your boundaries, when you start choosing yourself more often, when your confidence begins to show, when you stop apologizing for existing fully, they start pulling back. Not dramatically, not obviously, just enough to let you know something has changed. Maybe they get distant. Maybe they start teasing you more. Maybe they stop celebrating your wins. Maybe they stop showing up in the ways they used to. And you wonder if you're imagining it. You wonder if the growth that felt so freeing to you looks like a threat to them. And the more you shine, the more they seem to look away. The more you take up space, the more they shrink. There's the more you rise, the more they retreat. And at first, you try to make sense of it. You say, I'm still me. You say, I thought you'd be happy for me. You say, why does this feel different now? And they respond with things like, you've changed, or you're just all about yourself lately, or don't let this go to your head. And suddenly, the love that once felt warm now feels conditional, not on who you are, but on who you were when you were quieter, more accommodating, less sure of yourself. And now you're caught between the version of you they loved and the version of you that's finally loving yourself. And you start to feel guilty for growing. You start shrinking again in subtle ways, dialing back your voice, softening your edges, making yourself a little more palatable just to keep the connection intact. And it works temporarily. They smile again, they soften again, they return to the warmth you remember, and you realize their love isn't for all of you, it's only for the version that doesn't challenge them, doesn't grow past them, doesn't make them look at their own lack of growth. And in romantic relationships, this looks like the partner who was supportive until you got successful, who loved your ambition until it started taking up time and space and light and families. It's the parent who said, I want you to be happy, but made you feel selfish when your happiness didn't look like theirs. In friendships, it's the person who loved your softness but calls you arrogant the moment you begin to believe in your own strength. And the damage is that you start equating growth with loss. You start believing that becoming more of yourself means losing the people you love. You start staying small not because you want to, but because you're afraid that every step forward will be met with silence instead of celebration. But here's the truth. Anyone who only stays when you're shrinking isn't loving you. They're loving their comfort. And real love doesn't ask you to dim to fit inside someone else's shadow. Real love doesn't retreat. When you evolve, it rises with you. It adapts, it stretches, it learns to hold the new shape of who you're becoming. You are allowed to grow without guilt. You are allowed to want more without apology. You are allowed to become louder, brighter, fuller, and still expect to be loved. You do not have to trade your growth for connection. You do not have to choose between becoming and belonging. You are allowed to have both. And if someone leaves because you are no longer small enough to fit inside the version of you they preferred, let them go. Your light is not the problem. Their eyes just weren't ready for it, and you deserve a love that expands with you, not one that waits for you to shrink back down. When love looks like they keep you guessing on purpose. They never say they're leaving, but they never make it clear they're staying either. They never say they don't care, but they never go out of their way to show you they do. They drop just enough breadcrumbs to keep you wondering, just enough warmth to keep you hoping, just enough affection to make you question your own instincts when they go cold. You send the first text when they get distant. You over-explain when they cancel. You rearrange your whole schedule when they hurt you. You convince yourself it wasn't that bad because any confrontation might push them further away, and you can't afford that because they've trained you to believe that closeness is something that can be taken at any moment without warning. And every time you ask for clarity, they say, you're reading too much into it. They say, you're being dramatic. They say, we're fine. Why do you always need everything spelled out? And so you stop asking, but you don't stop wondering, and that wondering starts to shape you. You're never quite grounded, never quite certain, never quite safe, but you stay because the high, when they do show up, is just strong enough to make the low feel like your fault. And now, love feels like a gamble, not a guarantee, a puzzle you're always trying to solve, a game where the rules keep changing. And the goalposts keep moving. Just out of reach, you begin to measure the health of the relationship by how anxious you feel on a given day. You start interpreting their mood, their tone, their silences, trying to find meaning in absence, trying to assign hope to scraps. And when they finally say something sweet or show you attention, you feel relief, like you just earned your place again. And that's the trap, because this cycle trains you to chase, not connect, to work for love, not receive it, to doubt your own emotional reality every time they don't match your energy, and you tell yourself, they're just bad at communication, they're just going through something, they're just complicated. You remind yourself of the times they were kind, the times they said they cared, the times they opened up. But the space between those moments gets longer, and the cracks between your needs and their actions grow deeper, and you begin to shrink, not to be invisible, but to be tolerable, because you think maybe if you ask for less, they'll stay. Maybe if you don't make waves, they'll finally feel safe enough to open up. But the truth is, they're not confused. They're in control. And the inconsistency is the design, not the glitch. The ambiguity is the leash. It's how they keep you coming back. It's how they make you question your instincts instead of their behavior. In romantic relationships, this looks like the partner who pulls you close, then pushes you away and says it's because they're scared of how much they love you. In families, it's the parent who alternates between praise and cold withdrawal, making you feel like you always have to prove you're worth loving again. In friendships, it's the person who disappears for weeks and then drops back in like nothing happened and expects you to be grateful. And over time, you lose sight of what stable love even feels like, what consistency looks like, what it's like to be emotionally safe instead of emotionally spun around. And now love is no longer a sanctuary, it's a storm, and you're always trying to read the weather before it hits. But here's the truth, love that leaves you guessing isn't love, it's manipulation. It's control disguised as mystery. It's silence dressed as depth. You are allowed to ask for clarity. You are allowed to ask for consistency. You are allowed to want love that shows up when it says it will, that says how it feels, and means it, that doesn't punish you for needing to know where you stand. Because real love isn't afraid of definition. It doesn't pull you in and then make you feel foolish for trusting it. It stays, it confirms, it commits, not just with words, but with presence. And if someone keeps you in a place where you're always unsure, always chasing, always working to be chosen, then you're not in love, you're in survival. And love should not feel like a constant test of your worth. It should not keep you pacing in your mind, wondering if today is a day they'll show up or disappear. It should not use your hope as a leash and your longing as leverage. You deserve something steady, something solid, something that doesn't make you guess whether you matter, because you already do. And the person who truly loves you will never make that a question, they'll make it a fact. When love looks like they set the rules but never follow them. They tell you what's too much, what's too loud, what's too emotional, what's too needy. They give you guidelines on how to love them, how to speak to them, how to exist near them without disrupting their balance, without making them uncomfortable. They say things like, I can't deal with drama, or I need space when I'm upset, or I don't like being pressured. And you listen, you adjust, you shape yourself to match what they say they need, because you want to be respectful, you want to be good, you want to meet them where they are. So you soften your words, you give them room when they pull away, you tiptoe when they're quiet, And you think that's what love looks like: compromise, respect, awareness. But then you notice something. When you're upset, they want answers now. When you need space, they call you distant. When you express discomfort, they say you're being sensitive or defensive. When you cry, they accuse you of guilt tripping them. And you realize the rules they've set don't apply to them, only to you. They expect grace but offer none. They expect patience but give pressure. They expect understanding but respond with silence. And suddenly the relationship feels like a courtroom where they're always the judge and you're always the one on trial. And every time you try to name it to ask why your boundaries aren't honored the way you honor theirs, they say, you're twisting things, or you're playing the victim, or you never take responsibility. And now you're questioning whether your boundaries were valid at all. And that's where the damage begins, when you start believing that fairness doesn't apply to you, that love means following rules that shift depending on who's hurting. When you start managing their emotional climate more than your own, trying to avoid setting off another silent punishment or defensive outburst, and the double standard becomes invisible, like air you breathe, like weight you carry, like an agreement you never sign but still follow in romantic relationships. This looks like a partner who wants empathy for their stress but rolls their eyes at yours, who says they need time but gets angry when you take space, who asks for kindness but meets your pain with impatience. In families, it's the parent who expects full respect but mocks your boundaries, who says, I'm still your parent, to dismiss any truth that makes them uncomfortable. In friendships, it's the person who demands loyalty but disappears when you're the one struggling. And slowly this imbalance erodes your sense of worth. It teaches you that your emotions are negotiable, that your voice is less important, that your hurt is a disruption, not something to be healed, and you begin to silence yourself not just for them, but for the version of you they've decided is lovable, the one who bends but never breaks, who gives but never asks. And you start calling this love, but it's not love, it's control. It's selective compassion. It's affection with conditions. You are allowed to say, if you get space, I get space. You are allowed to say, if you expect kindness, I expect it too. You are allowed to want love that isn't one-sided, that doesn't turn your boundaries into offenses or your feelings into flaws, because real love doesn't come with two sets of rules. It doesn't ask you to shrink while the other grows. It doesn't define fairness by how comfortable one person gets to stay. It moves in both directions. It honors both wounds. It sees both truths, and it doesn't punish you for needing what it demands for itself. And if someone keeps rewriting the rules to serve their own comfort while calling you difficult for wanting the same, they're not loving you, they're managing you. And love should never feel like something you have to prove. While following a playbook you didn't write, you deserve to be loved with reciprocity, with integrity, with standards that lift you up, not shut you down. And anyone who asks you to live by rules they never follow is not asking for love, they're asking for obedience. And you are not made to be obedient, you are made to be whole. When love looks like they shame you for your coping mechanisms. They see the way you hold things in, the way you take long walks when you're upset, the way you need a few minutes to breathe before responding, the way you sometimes zone out in conversation, not because you're bored, but because you're managing emotions too big to say out loud. They see it all, and at first they say they understand. They say, I get it. We all cope in different ways. They say, whatever helps you stay grounded is okay with me. But then one day you take too long to answer a text and they say, oh, here we go again with the disappearing act. Or you ask for space during an argument and they say you always shut down when it gets real. Or you cry and they say you're just using tears to avoid accountability. And suddenly, the way you've learned to survive becomes something ugly, something mocked, something shamed, something used against you in the moments you most need compassion. And it confuses you because these aren't strategies you chose out of convenience. They were forged in pain. They were the best you could do with what you had. They were the skills you built in silence before you knew what healing looked like. And now they're being weaponized by the very person who promised to hold you. And so you start hiding them. You stop saying, I need a minute, and instead you fake calm. You stop crying in front of them and instead cry alone. You stop asking for time and start pushing yourself into responses that don't reflect how you feel. And they say, I'm so glad you're finally opening up. But inside you know you're not. You're just performing again for safety, for stability, for approval, because love has started to feel like a place where your coping isn't allowed, where your history is an inconvenience, where your wounds are only accepted if they look pretty and predictable and easy to manage. In romantic relationships, this looks like a partner who mocks your anxiety one day and calls you strong the next. As long as your strength doesn't disrupt their comfort in families, it's the parent who taught you not to talk about feelings and then complains that you're emotionally distant in friendships. It's the person who says, "I'm here for you," until your way of handling stress doesn't fit their idea of support. And the damage is that you begin to believe your healing is broken. You begin to believe your strategies make you unlovable. You begin to believe that unless you cope in the ways they deem acceptable, you're failing at being loved. You are allowed to say, "This is how I've learned to survive." You are allowed to say, "I'm still working on it, but I need you to respect where I am." You are allowed to ask for compassion even when your pain doesn't look tidy, because real love doesn't shame your survival. It doesn't punish you for being shaped by the things you've been through. It doesn't mock the very tools that helped you make it here. It honors them, even as you grow past them. It doesn't demand that you cope perfectly. It just stays while you try. If someone only supports your healing when it looks like progress, but not when it looks like process, they're not really supporting you. They're tolerating a version of you they can control. And you are not here to be controlled. You are here to be seen fully. And if someone can't handle the reality of how you deal with your pain, they don't deserve a front row seat to your peace. And when love looks like they turn empathy into a competition, you try to explain what's hurting you, not to blame, not to accuse, not to shame, but just to be seen, to be understood, to let someone close enough to the wound that maybe they'll care enough to hold it with you. But instead of listening, they pivot. They say, "Well, I've had it worse," or "You think that's bad?" or "Let me tell you what I went through." And just like that, the focus shifts, not to connection but comparison, not to presence but performance. And suddenly you're sitting across from someone who doesn't want to understand your pain. They want to rank it. They want to prove that theirs is heavier, that theirs is harder, that theirs is more worthy of attention. And now your emotions feel like a contest. You didn't sign up for a race you never wanted to run. And every time you try to speak about your experience, they counter it not with empathy, but with escalation. They bring up old stories, unrelated stories, stories that say, "Look how much I've suffered." And beneath it all, the message is clear. Only one of us gets to hurt here. Only one of us gets to take up space. And it won't be you, so you start shrinking your feelings. You start second-guessing your needs. You start hesitating before sharing anything real because you've learned that every moment of vulnerability might be met with a monologue about how much harder someone else has had it. And it doesn't always sound cruel. Sometimes it sounds like connection, like someone just trying to relate, but there's a difference between relating and erasing. And when someone constantly redirects the spotlight back to their pain, they're not trying to understand you. They're trying to stay in control. In romantic relationships, this looks like the partner who never asks follow-up questions, never says, "That must have been hard for you," only, "You think that's bad?" in a long story that leaves you feeling invisible in families. It's the parent who can't hear your pain without reminding you how much they sacrificed, as if their past erases your present. In friendships, it's the person who calls you dramatic for expressing anything they haven't personally survived. And the damage is that you start believing your feelings have to be extraordinary to count, that unless you're breaking down, bleeding, begging, your pain isn't real enough to be honored. And now you're in relationships where you're not allowed to feel unless they're feeling more and louder and longer. And that's not empathy. That's emotional control dressed as shared experience. And you are allowed to say, "I'm not trying to compete. I just want to be heard." You are allowed to say, "This is what I'm feeling, and I need you to hold it with me, not overwrite it." You are allowed to ask for attention without being accused of selfishness or drama, because real love doesn't treat your pain like a footnote in someone else's story. It doesn't turn your vulnerability into a platform for their monologue. It doesn't require you to minimize yourself in order to be in the room. It leans in, it listens, it makes space. It doesn't say, "Me too," but worse. It says, "Tell me more." And if someone only responds to your hurt by ranking their own, what they're really saying is, "This isn't about you, and you deserve better than that. You deserve connection, not competition. You deserve to be held without being compared, and you deserve a love that meets you where you are, not one that makes you earn your place by pretending your pain is louder than theirs. When love looks like they praise you for being low maintenance until you're not. They tell you they love how easygoing you are. They say you're not like other people. They compliment you for not asking too much, for being chill, for going with the flow. They say, you're the kind of person I don't have to worry about. And at first it feels good. It feels like a reward for everything you've tried to be, all the softness, all the patience, all the quiet endurance. Gets noticed, gets admired, gets called strength. But then one day, you ask for something, not even something big, just a little more time, a little more affection, a little more consistency, and their face changes suddenly. You're needy or demanding or starting drama, and now you're confused because you thought the whole point of love was that it could grow, that it could deepen, that it could stretch to hold new needs. But the moment yours show up, so does their resistance, and that's when you realize what they really loved wasn't you. It was your silence. It was your absence of need. It was your ability to self-soothe, to stay small, to smile through disappointment. And now that you've shifted, now that you've grown, now that you've said, I actually do need something, the love feels less certain, less warm, less generous, and you start asking yourself, was I better when I needed nothing? Am I ruining things by speaking up? Should I just go back to being easy? And that's the trap, because they never explicitly told you not to have needs. They just praised you every time you didn't. And that praise felt like safety. And so you learned to equate being loved with being low maintenance, with being simple, with never asking for more than what they were already offering, even when it wasn't enough. And slowly you stopped checking in with yourself. You stopped acknowledging the parts of you that longed for deeper presence, deeper connection, deeper care, because you thought needing more might make them love you less. And that's where the damage takes root, when love becomes something you only feel worthy of as long as you stay small in romantic relationships. This looks like the partner who says, you're so easy to love, as long as you don't ever ask for emotional intimacy, who gets uncomfortable the moment you start asking for what you really want. In families, it's the parent who brags about how independent you are, but never stops to wonder whether you had to be that way just to survive in friendships. It's the person who calls you their low-drama friend, but disappears the moment you're the one going through something, and you begin to wonder if your worth is tied to how quiet your needs are, how well you manage on your own, how little you ask, and you start calling this dynamic peace. But it's not peace, it's neglect, it's emotional minimalism, disguised as stability, and you are allowed to say, I know I've been quiet about what I need, but I won't be anymore. You are allowed to say, I want to be loved when I'm easy and when I'm not. You are allowed to take up more space, more attention, more care, and you do not owe anyone a version of yourself that is always okay, just so they feel comfortable. Because real love doesn't only show up for the calm days, it shows up when you crack open, when you reach out, when you say, I don't want to do this alone anymore. It doesn't punish your honesty, it honors it. It doesn't shrink in the face of your fullness, it leans in and holds it. And if someone only knows how to love the version of you that never asks for anything, that's not love, that's convenience. And you are not put here to be convenient, you are put here to be whole, and the right love will never make you earn connection by pretending your needs don't exist. When love looks like always putting you first, they tell you it's because they love you, that you matter more than anything, that their whole world revolves around you. They cancel plans for you. They drop everything the moment you need something. They say yes even when they're tired. They show up over and over again no matter the cost to themselves. And in the beginning it feels like devotion, like commitment, like the kind of love everyone wants but few ever find. You feel chosen, cared for, safe, because how could it be anything but love when someone is constantly putting you first, when someone is always there, when someone makes you feel like the center of their universe? But then something shifts, slowly, quietly. At first you notice how uncomfortable they get when you take time for yourself, how they withdraw a little when you choose someone else's company for the night, how their voice tightens when you don't immediately reply, how they start keeping track of favors, of time, of how often you've put them first in return. And the praise they once gave so freely begins to come with a shadow, I always make time for you. Don't you see that? I would never have missed that dinner for anything. I guess I just care more than you do. Suddenly the love feels heavier, tighter. It no longer flows. It leans hard. It leans on your time, your attention, your ability to give back. And if you fall short even once, it shows. The silence, the sighs, the guilt-laced compliments that sound more like obligations. You realize that what looked like unconditional love was actually a trade, a contract, a bargain you didn't know you were making, that all the self-sacrifice was actually a form of control, and now you're trapped. Because saying something would make you seem ungrateful, pulling back would make you the villain. So you give, you adjust. You start measuring your love in returned favors, in scheduled time, in emotional energy spent just to make sure they still feel valued. And this isn't love anymore. It's performance. It's obligation. It's keeping the peace so the relationship doesn't collapse under the weight of one person's needs. In relationships, this looks like the partner who prides themselves on how much they do for you but never asks how it feels to be on the receiving end, who uses the narrative of selflessness to avoid examining their expectations. In families, it's the parent who gave everything and now expects everything back, who brings up every sacrifice the moment you hesitate to give them more. In friendships, it's the person who shows up unasked, then holds the memory of their help over you forever, and you learn that being loved means being watched, measured, expected to match a level of devotion that was never truly free. You start to feel like love is a debt, something you must earn, repay, protect. You stop resting, you stop saying no. You forget what it feels like to have space that isn't laced with guilt. And still, they'll say it's love. They'll say no one else will care for you the way they do, that no one else will make you a priority like this, that they're only hurt because they love so deeply, and it sounds noble, beautiful even, till you realize that their love can't breathe unless it's constantly being validated, that their affection disappears the moment you step outside the lines. You're allowed to name that. You're allowed to say love shouldn't come with this much pressure. You're allowed to need balance, to want mutual care that doesn't tip into emotional debt, to want connection that doesn't ask you to prove your worth every time you rest. Real love doesn't make you choose between being loved and being free. It holds space. It respects limits. It doesn't keep score. It doesn't hurt you for taking time for yourself. It doesn't disguise possession as devotion. Because emotional damage doesn't always look like yelling or neglect. Sometimes it looks like someone giving you everything just so they can say they own your heart, just so you feel too guilty to ever walk away. When love looks like constant protection, they always want to protect you. They say it like it's a promise, like something beautiful. They check in often. They ask where you are, who you're with, what time you'll be home. They worry about you. They text to make sure you got there safely. They tell you it's because they care, because the world is dangerous, because they'd never forgive themselves if something happened to you. And at first it feels sweet, reassuring, like safety, like someone finally wants to hold you close and never let go, like someone is watching out for you in a world that's so quick to forget. You tell your friends they're just really protective. You say it with pride because it feels like love. But then the questions grow sharper, more frequent, more specific. Not just, are you okay? But, why didn't you tell me you were going out? Who's that in the photo? Why didn't you answer right away? What were you doing for 3 hours with no response? You start feeling anxious when you see their name light up your phone, not because you don't love them, but because you're already preparing your explanation. You start editing your stories. You start omitting little things to avoid conflict. You begin to calculate how your decisions will look through their eyes, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you know how easily they turn concern into accusation, and when you confront it, when you say you need space or privacy, they act hurt, like you're pushing them away, like you're the one turning love into distance. They say things like, I'm only like this because I care, or I just worry about you too much, or I can't help it, you're everything to me. And suddenly, your boundaries feel like betrayal, like evidence that you don't love them enough, that you don't appreciate their protectiveness, that you don't understand how hard it is to care this much. And so you fold, you reassure, you explain, You give more access, more information, more time. You tell yourself, this is what love looks like. Being known so deeply, being watched so closely, being treasured so fully that someone can't bear to not know where you are. But what you don't realize is that you've stopped feeling free. You've stopped breathing fully. You've stopped being alone with your own life. Because everything you do now has another layer, their awareness, their opinion, their permission, and that's the emotional damage hiding inside constant protection. It's not always about control with cruelty. Sometimes it's control with care, with soft voices and loving eyes, with gentle reminders that sound like, I'm just worried about you. But if worry always leads to restriction, if concern always leads to surveillance, if love always comes with conditions about who you see, where you go, and how much you explain, then that's not protection, that's possession. In relationships, this shows up when they use love as a reason to monitor you, when they say, I just need to know everything because I love you so much. In families, it's the parent who checks your phone, tracks your location, calls repeatedly until you pick up, and tells you it's because they care, even when you're an adult. In friendships, it's the friend who gets upset when you make plans without them, who says they're looking out for you but is actually policing your choices. And the worst part is, it's hard to argue with, because it doesn't look like damage, it looks like devotion. It sounds like love, but real love doesn't require constant explanation. Real love doesn't replace your independence with anxiety. Real love trusts. Real love breathes. Real love wants you safe, but also free. You are allowed to say, I love that you care, but I need space to make my own choices. You are allowed to say, your protectiveness is starting to feel like control. You are allowed to want room to exist without feeling watched, because love that always needs proof isn't protection, it's fear wrapped in closeness. And closeness that costs you your freedom will always feel like a cage, no matter how much they say it's built from love. When love looks like needing you too much, say you're everything to them, that they don't know who they'd be without you, that you saved them, that you're the only one who understands. At first, it feels powerful, special, like you've found a kind of love that transcends the ordinary, like your connection is deeper, more intense, more real than anything you've known before. They call you their safe place, their lifeline, their whole world, and it feels good to be wanted that much, to be needed, to be the person someone turns to for comfort, clarity, meaning. You feel important, valued, seen, but slowly the weight of that need begins to build. You start noticing that their emotions rest entirely in your hands, that your mood determines theirs, that your availability dictates whether they have a good day, that your silence, even if brief, causes them to spiral. They ask where you've been when you don't reply quickly. They say they can't sleep if you haven't talked that night. They say they just feel off when you're busy or distracted. They don't always say it with blame. Sometimes it comes wrapped in vulnerability, in trembling voices. It's messages that say, I don't know what I'd do without you, or I just feel so lost when you're not around. And because you care, you respond, you reassure, you show up. Again and again, even when you're tired, even when you're struggling, even when you need space but can't afford the guilt that would come with taking it, because you're not just their partner or their friend or their child anymore. You're their emotional oxygen, and now you can't exhale, you can't rest, you can't have a bad day without fearing how it will affect them. You can't take space without watching them unravel. You can't set a boundary without hurting someone who's told you they need you to survive. That's not romance, that's emotional dependence. And while it might look like devotion, what it really is, quiet emotional damage. Not because they're bad, not because they're manipulative, but because somewhere along the way, the relationship stopped being mutual, and you became their anchor, their therapist, their emotional regulator, and now your entire sense of peace is tied to whether or not they're okay, which means you're never really free. In relationships, this looks like the partner who says, you're the only one I can talk to, and then leans on you for everything without ever learning how to hold themselves. In families, it's the parent who confides in you, like you're the adult, like you're the only one who gets it, like their emotional survival depends on your presence. In friendships, it's the person who breaks down when you cancel, who accuses you of abandoning them when you need time alone, who turns every moment of distance into a crisis. And the longer it goes on, the more you begin to believe this is what love looks like. That love means always being available. That love means absorbing pain. That love means being the strong one, no matter how much it costs. But real love doesn't consume. It doesn't cling. It doesn't make you responsible for someone else's mental health. Real love allows space. Real love lets both people breathe. Real love doesn't require you to be the only source of light in someone's entire world. You are allowed to say, I love you, but I can't be everything for you. You are allowed to say, your pain is real, but I'm not your solution. You are allowed to step back, to draw a line, to choose balance over burnout, because needing someone too much isn't love, it's fear. And when fear disguises itself as love, it sounds like closeness, but it feels like suffocation. You deserve to be loved, not depended on like a lifeline. You deserve to be supported, not used as a shield against someone else's loneliness. And you deserve to take up space in your own life without feeling like someone else's world will fall apart because you finally took a breath. When love looks like constant forgiveness, they mess up again and again and again, but they always apologize. They always come back with the right words, the soft eyes, the regret, the sadness in their voice that sounds so sincere, so raw that it disarms you. They say, I know I hurt you, or I hate myself for doing this, or I promise I'll do better. And you believe them because it sounds like accountability, because you want to believe people can change. Because love, you're told, is about forgiveness, about working through the hard things, about giving grace. And so you give it. You give them another chance. You remind yourself that no one's perfect, that relationships take work, that healing isn't linear. But then it happens again. Maybe not right away, maybe not in the same way, maybe a new variation of the same old pain. They raise their voice, they dismiss your feelings, they make a decision that cuts you out, and when you react, they look surprised, hurt even, like they didn't know you'd take it that way, like your pain wasn't part of the plan. And so the apology returns, familiar, well-rehearsed, tear-stained. I didn't mean to. You know I love you. I'm working on it. And you find yourself holding their guilt instead of your own heartbreak. You find yourself comforting the person who caused the pain again, because you've been taught that forgiveness is noble, that forgiveness is strength, that if you love someone, you give them room to get it wrong, and again, and again, and again. But here's what you don't realize. You're not in a cycle of healing, you're in a cycle of harm. And forgiveness has become the glue holding it together. Not growth, not accountability, forgiveness. Forgiveness that's expected before the wound even has time to ache. Forgiveness that's required to keep the peace. Forgiveness that's weaponized as proof of love. And over time, your standards erode. You start negotiating with your own worth. You say, they didn't mean it, or they're trying, or it could have been worse. You start doubting your own pain. You stop trusting your instincts. You start asking yourself whether you're being too sensitive, too dramatic, too unwilling to give grace, because every time they mess up, the conversation turns back to you, to your capacity to forgive, to your patience, to your heart, and that's how emotional damage hides behind kindness. When the focus shifts from their behavior to your response, when they hurt you and somehow you end up proving your love by how quickly you get over it, that's not intimacy, that's imbalance. In relationships, it looks like the partner who keeps crossing your boundaries and then crying about how bad they feel, who turns every confrontation into a moment where you're comforting them. In families, it's the parent who lashes out and then demands hugs without apology, who tells you, you know I didn't mean it, and expects everything to go back to normal. In friendships, it's the person who keeps disappointing you and then says, but we've been through so much, don't throw it away over one mistake. And one mistake becomes many, but they always say sorry. And you always say, it's okay, even when it isn't. Even when the apology is just a pause between repetitions. Even when it's not followed by change. You are allowed to want more than a heartfelt I'm sorry. You are allowed to say, this keeps happening, and I can't pretend it doesn't hurt. You are allowed to ask for actions, not just apologies. Because forgiveness without boundaries becomes permission. And when love keeps asking you to forgive the same thing, it's not asking you to grow, it's asking you to shrink. You deserve love that doesn't depend on how much pain you can absorb without breaking. You deserve love that doesn't require you to be the bigger person every time, and you deserve to be with people who take your pain seriously the first time, not just when you finally stop forgiving. When love looks like constant sacrifice, they don't ask you outright. Not at first. They just admire how giving you are, how selfless, how understanding, how you always seem to put others first. They say things like, "You're so patient with me," or "I don't know how you handle so much," or "You're the only one who never complains," and you take pride in it because it feels like love to be seen that way, to be appreciated for your ability to give without limits, to be valued for how much you carry without breaking. But slowly, giving becomes the default. Not just something you do, it becomes who you are. You start shifting your schedule to fit theirs. You start letting go of your hobbies, your plans, your needs. You give up your space, your time, your comfort. You move things around to keep them happy. You lower your standards to avoid conflict. You compromise over and over again because it's not a big deal and they're just going through a lot, and that's what love is, right? You tell yourself relationships require sacrifice, that being in love means bending, means stretching, means setting yourself aside sometimes, and it's true, sometimes. But sacrifice, when it's constant, isn't love. It's erosion, it's quiet self-abandonment, it's shrinking yourself day by day until there's barely anything left to give. You find yourself exhausted, depleted, bitter. You wonder why you're always the one who gives more, who adjusts, who apologizes first, who makes things easier. And when you finally say something, when you say you're tired, when you ask for balance, they look confused, surprised, hurt. They say, "I thought you didn't mind," or "You've always been like this," or worse, "Now you're changing on me." And that's the emotional damage. That they didn't just get used to your sacrifices, they came to rely on them. They built their comfort on your flexibility, their ease on your exhaustion, their peace on your silence. And now, when you ask for something in return, they act like it's an attack because they mistook your selflessness for infinite capacity. Because they believed your love meant self-erasure. In relationships, it's the partner who says, "You're so low maintenance," while never asking how much you've had to swallow just to keep things running smoothly. In families, it's the parent who calls you the strong one while never noticing how much you've been silently carrying. In friendships, it's the friend who says you never need anything and uses that as an excuse to never show up for you. And the more you give, the less you're seen. Because the people who benefit from your sacrifices rarely stop to ask what they're costing you. But you know, you feel it. In the ache that never fully goes away, in the tension in your body when you agree to one more thing, in the quiet resentment building each time you bite your tongue, you are allowed to stop, to rest, to say no, to say, "I love you, but I can't keep disappearing to make this work." Because real love doesn't ask you to erase yourself. It doesn't keep score, but it doesn't ignore imbalance either. It doesn't call your boundaries selfish. It doesn't punish you for wanting reciprocity. It holds space. It shares the weight. It gives back. You deserve a love that sees your full humanity, not just the parts that are convenient. You deserve to be held to, not just by your own strength, but by someone else's willingness to meet you halfway. And you deserve to love yourself enough to stop calling sacrifice the same thing as love, when all it's ever really done is leave you empty. When love looks like jealousy in disguise. They say it's only because they love you, that they can't help it, that they're just afraid of losing you. The jealousy shows up early, maybe even before you notice it. At first, it sounds playful. "Who is that texting you? You always look amazing when you go out. I bet people notice. I just don't like the way they look at you." It's framed as a compliment, like your beauty is dangerous, like your light draws too much attention, like they just want to protect what's theirs. You laugh it off at first, you explain things they didn't ask about, you downplay interactions, reassure them, say, "You have nothing to worry about." But eventually, you stop laughing because it doesn't go away. The questions get sharper. The glance is more suspicious. You notice how they stiffen when you talk about someone else, someone they haven't approved of, how their voice changes when they ask, "Did they text you again?" Or "Why didn't you mention that before?" And slowly the space around you begins to shrink, not physically. Emotionally, you feel like you're being watched even when they're not in the room. You stop posting certain pictures, You avoid mentioning certain names. You let go of friendships they don't feel comfortable with, not because they said you had to, but because the aftermath is exhausting. The explanations, the subtle guilt, the tension in the air when you mention someone they've flagged as a threat, and they say it's love. They say it's because they've been hurt before. That trust takes time, that you're just too beautiful, too magnetic, too much of a catch. They make it sound flattering, like the jealousy is proof they care, but it doesn't feel like care, it feels like control, dressed in insecurity, wrapped in love language, reinforced by tears, by trembling voices, by accusations wrapped in, I just feel. In relationships, this looks like the partner who checks your messages just once, who always needs to know where you are, who becomes cold after you spend time with people they didn't approve of. In families, it's the sibling who resents your success but says they're proud. The parent who's uncomfortable with your independence but says it's because they want you safe. In friendships, it's the friend who suddenly pulls away when you get close to someone else, who says things like, I just don't want to lose you, while punishing you for loving anyone but them. And over time, you start believing it's your job to ease their jealousy, to manage their emotions, to predict what might trigger them. You become responsible for keeping their fear in check, even when that fear becomes a leash, even when that leash shortens every time you try to stretch. And that's not love. That's emotional damage pretending to be loyalty. Love doesn't shrink your world to fit someone else's insecurity. Love doesn't keep you from connection. Love doesn't make you feel like every conversation, every compliment, every friendship is a landmine waiting to be stepped on. You are allowed to say your jealousy makes me feel unsafe. You are allowed to say this isn't about love, it's about control. You are allowed to name the way it manipulates you into constant reassurance, into silence, into isolation. Real love is secure enough to let you shine. It's grounded enough to survive your freedom. It doesn't confuse closeness with possession. It doesn't need to know everything to trust you, and it never demands that you give up your world just to keep someone else's heart calm. You deserve to love and be loved without being cornered, without being suspected, without being asked to prove your loyalty every time you laugh or speak or connect with another soul. Jealousy is not love. It's fear dressed in romance, and you're allowed to walk away from anything that makes your life smaller under the name of keeping you close.